Chapter 476. The sword was a weapon that relied heavily on technique. Just the basic movements included slashing, stabbing, pointing, lifting, breaking, cutting, wiping, piercing, lifting, twisting, sweeping, and so on. It was then integrated into the footwork, grip, and posture. Its complexity was absolutely shocking. Otherwise, it would not have stood out among the many cold weapons and become the undisputed king. It was precisely because of the variety of uses that the sword was the first choice of countless close combat professions. It had developed into many varieties, including the two-handed greatsword that focused on slashing, the rapier that focused on stabbing, the dagger that focused on dexterity, the half-handed sword that focused on defense, the longsword. As for the rapier, it was the most special type. It did not have the powerful slashing ability of the two-handed greatsword, nor did it have the terrifying penetration of the rapier. At the same time, it was not as dexterous as the dagger. The two-finger-wide rapier could not cause any fatal injuries unless it stabbed a vital point. But it was this seemingly useless weapon that could immediately become a terrifying killing weapon in the hands of a wandering swordsman. With his nimble movements and the misleading attack method of trickery, Neil had successfully made Andre experience the feeling of brushing shoulders with death once again. He was now considering whether to agree to the other party's conditions and obediently be a pirate for a period of time. When a mage's strength recovered, he would kill everyone on the ship. The old man noticed that Andre's eyes were becoming more and more dangerous. He gently shook off the blood on the rapier and said with a smile, "Not bad. You actually still have a strong fighting spirit after seeing the huge gap between us. I'm really starting to like you more and more now. How about this? As long as you kill that girl as proof of your loyalty, I'll accept you as my disciple. Not only can I give you a higher position, I can also teach you the skills of a wandering swordsman. There's nothing cheaper in the world than this. Don't force me to ruin your future with my own hands. Young man, think carefully before you answer. There's plenty of time. I've always been very patient." He obviously treated Andre as an ordinary youth on the island and was planning to use threats and enticement to take him under his wing. One had to know that pirates also attached great importance to the absorption and cultivation of talents. Many famous pirate groups could even be traced back to the era of the first pirate king hundreds of years ago. They could be called the nobles of the pirates. Unfortunately, Neil had chosen the wrong target this time. A terrifying, unknown creature like a transmigrator wasn't someone a small character like him could recruit and control. Looking at the smug look on Fiona's face, Andre's mouth curved into an imperceptible arc. He deliberately put on a complicated expression and glanced at Fiona. Then he asked in a very conflicted tone, "Do you have to kill her?" "Of course. If I don't kill her, how can I see your determination? How can I feel at ease teaching you the true skills of a wandering swordsman?" Neil continued to tempt him with words. In his opinion, the best way to deal with a young man in his teens was to force him to commit an unforgivable crime and then create an atmosphere where he had nowhere else to go except on the ship. Finally, he could only walk the path of being a pirate until it was dark. The pirates of the Sardinia Islands had already used this method to plunder many talents in the Southern Sea, so he was quite proficient in using it. Sigh. All right, looks like I don't have a second choice. With that, Andre put on a sorrowful expression and slowly walked in the direction of Fiona. At the same time, he quietly reached out his hand and made a gesture of pulling the trigger. Perhaps others would not understand the meaning of this action, but the girl who had mastered the shooting skills of a flintlock was no stranger to it. She immediately raised her gun and fired without hesitation. Bang! Bang! With two loud noises, the lead bullets pierced through the air and flew towards the target at an extremely fast speed. Normally, it would be difficult for an ordinary person to dodge. However, Neil was obviously not an ordinary person. At the moment the gunshot sounded, he suddenly turned his body sideways, and his arm rotated the long sword at an extremely fast speed. He forcibly changed the trajectory of the bullet so that it brushed past the tip of his nose. Not even a single hair on his body was harmed. Andre never expected the two primitive muskets to be of any use. He only used them to buy himself some time. At the moment the gunshot sounded, he brandished his rapier and scimitar and rushed forward, quickly launching a frenzied attack. Although he did not have as superb swordsmanship as the other party, he was not inferior in terms of agility and speed. In fact, he was even stronger than the other party. In particular, the strong body coordination brought about by the 17 points of agility forced the old man, who was a level 6 wandering swordsman, to be flustered and in danger several times. There was a saying in Orire that if you wanted to understand the characteristics of a profession, you had to become a member of this profession first. This was because only by personally experiencing it bit by bit could you understand its strengths and weaknesses to the greatest extent. Obviously, Andre, who had become a wandering swordsman, knew the weakness of this profession best, and that was that its strength was seriously low. To give the simplest example, his current strength attribute was 12, which was only equivalent to a worker who often carried heavy objects at the docks. Among the many melee professions, this was already considered low. Most normal level 1 warriors could reach around 14, and those with good talent could even reach above 16. However, if you put this 12 points in a wandering swordsman or a thief, you would immediately become a Herculean man. After all, a wandering swordsman was a special profession that focused on agility and intelligence. Generally speaking, those who chose this profession would not have high strength. Due to the limitations of the human body's muscle structure, those with great strength and endurance would generally have a large proportion of red muscles, and their agility would often be relatively poor. On the other hand, those with high agility would have a larger proportion of white muscles, and their explosive power would be very strong in a short period of time, but their strength and endurance would be seriously lacking. As for the rare pink muscles, although they could simultaneously balance strength, endurance, and agility, their proportion in the human body was too low, and it was simply not enough to change anything. Finally, from the moment a person was born, the proportion of red and white muscles in the body was fixed. Therefore, some people were born with great agility and explosive power, while others were strong and durable. Postnatal training could only make a certain part of the muscles more developed, but it could never change the type of muscle. Although Orire was a different world, the people who lived here had the same body structure as the people on Earth. To be exact, they were pure-blooded humans, and those who were mixed with special blood were not included in this list. For example, Andre himself had now begun to transform into an element, and his heart had already been replaced by a core. Chapter 477. From a high-speed combo earlier, Andre could basically confirm that this old man with superb sword skills definitely had a white muscle constitution. This meant that even though the old man seemed undefeatable, as long as Andre could hold on until his white muscles started to get tired, the rest of the battle would be much easier. It was precisely because of this reason that Andre unleashed a frenzied barrage of attacks, forcing the old man to continuously retreat, dodge, block, and parry. Coupled with the unbelievable sharpness of his mithril scimitar, he didn't give the old man any chance to breathe. In such a situation, not to mention counterattacking, even breathing was difficult. Both sides were holding their breaths, just like a cheater running at full speed. Once they let out their breaths, it would immediately mean defeat. In fact, Neil was already starting to regret that he had been so obsessed with recruiting this treacherous little monster. He was now in an extremely sorry state, and if this continued, his life might be in danger. Damn it, after this period of time, I'll definitely kill this brat. The old man swore in his heart. At the same time, Andre, who was brandishing his sword and scimitar, cursed in his heart. Bastard, why isn't this old fart exhausted yet? I won't be able to hold on for another 10 seconds. Attacking was more exhausting than defending. This was an eternal truth. In order to push his speed to the limit, he couldn't breathe at all. If he slowed down, he would immediately be faced with the terrifying sword technique that the roaming swordsman was proud of, crafty strike. But unfortunately, not everything in this world would not happen just because you didn't want it to. On the contrary, just like Murphy's Law in psychology, nothing was as simple as it seemed on the surface. Everything would take longer than expected. Things that could go wrong would always go wrong. If you were worried that something would happen, then it would definitely happen. After holding his breath for 2 minutes, Andre, who was in a state of vigorous exercise, finally couldn't hold on any longer. He finally opened his mouth and took in a deep breath, slowing down his attacks. But in this short moment, Neil sharply grasped the opportunity. The thin sword in his hand abruptly swung away, the mithril scimitar. Like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue, it nimbly slipped past the defense and stabbed towards the old man's throat. His movements were so fast that he didn't give his opponent any chance to dodge. From his vicious eyes, it could be seen that he definitely wanted to get rid of the hidden danger with one strike. Seeing that the sharp sword tip was getting closer and closer to him, Andre knew that he couldn't completely dodge it. He immediately gritted his teeth and made a prompt decision. He didn't even have the slightest intention of dodging as he swung his scimitar down fiercely. As a transmigrator, he had a better understanding of the human body than most people in this world. He understood that the throat was not the most fatal part of the body. As long as the strike was fast enough, he could kill the other party before the blood clogged the trachea. Then, he could activate the amulets 3 times a day to heal minor injuries. He would definitely not die. Neil Grant was stunned. He couldn't believe that a teenager could ignore the threat of death and take him down with him. But now, the situation didn't allow him to take another step back. The sound of the mithril scimitar slicing through the air at high speed reached his ears. Even if he withdrew his thin sword now, he wouldn't be able to block the sharp edge of the blade. He could only brace himself and take the enemy down with him. But in the face of death, everyone would instinctively dodge. It wasn't controlled by the mind. It was an automatic order given by the brain after being threatened. No one was an exception. Even though Neil had experienced hundreds of battles and possessed swordsmanship that most close combat professionals couldn't reach, he was still a human. Moreover, he was the kind of old man who cherishes life very much. So, he was afraid, and his body fell back uncontrollably. After all, he was an old man who could feel his life slipping away all the time, so he was particularly attached to being alive. This was also why most of the people who did things without considering the consequences and even committed suicide were young people. On the other hand, the older people would rather beg on the streets than choose to die unless they were particularly stimulated or shocked. Human nature was complicated and, at the same time, very strange. When faced with a choice, the consideration wasn't one's own value, but rather what one lacked the most. For example, if both of them were kidnapped, the first thing a poor person would think of was not to obediently pay the ransom, but to inform the police to rescue them. This was because to an ordinary family, the ransom demanded by the kidnappers was too large. If they really paid the ransom, they would instantly be burdened with a heavy debt that was enough to completely destroy the entire family. On the contrary, when the rich encountered such a situation, they would usually first confirm whether the kidnappers could guarantee the safety of the hostage. If it was true, then they wouldn't mind paying a large sum of money to redeem their loved ones. This was because although money was important to them, it wasn't everything. It wouldn't take long for them to earn it back. Obviously, as an old man who was nearing the end of his life was the most precious thing. As his body leaned back more and more, the speed of Neil's piercing naturally slowed down. Perhaps he couldn't completely avoid it, but a slight deviation wouldn't be a problem. Opportunity. Andre noticed this and quickly took advantage of the loophole. He gently moved his neck 2 centimeters away. In the next second, pooh! The sharp tip of the sword directly pierced through the muscles and blood vessels on the right side of the throat. Bright red blood instantly spurted out a few centimeters and then came out from the back of the neck. The intense pain immediately transmitted to the brain. Your vital point has been hit by the enemy. Fatal blow effect activated. Your HP has decreased by 35 points. Warning, your blood is rapidly draining, losing 1 HP every 3 seconds. Although he noticed that his HP was rapidly decreasing, he didn't stop. The mithril machete was like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. With a snap, he cut off the old man's head from the nose. Red and white gray matter also splattered everywhere. Then, with a plop, the old man fell to the ground, completely dead. Fatal blow. Fatal blow effect activated. Dealt 32 points of damage to the target. The target's brain has been completely destroyed. Dead. Received 700 EXP. As a row of information appeared on his retina, Andre finally breathed a sigh of relief. He immediately endured the pain and pulled out the thin sword from his neck. Without thinking, he quickly activated the healing magic on the amulet. In just a few seconds, the blood spurting out had stopped. Although the wound hadn't completely healed, it wouldn't affect his normal activities. Chapter 478. The battle between warrior professions was like a battle between masters described in martial arts novels. Every tiny detail would eventually be magnified countless times, and life and death would be decided in an instant. Even legendary warriors and legendary mages were no exception. There was no doubt that the battle between the two wandering swordsmen ended with Andre's victory. It could be said that even he did not expect it to turn out like this. After all, in terms of profession level, he was only equivalent to a level 1 wandering swordsman. However, Neil was not only a level 6 wandering swordsman, but also a master swordsman. In particular, the unique ability of the wandering swordsman, Crafty Strike, had been used to the extreme by him. In the end, if it were not for the inexplicable dodging action, it was possible that they would have died together. To some extent, just now could be regarded as one of the most thrilling battles that Andre had ever experienced. It was even not inferior to the time when he faced the necromancer, Ulysses. A slight mistake, and he would have been doomed eternally. With lingering fear, he touched the wound on his neck that had not been completely healed. He took a deep breath and slightly bowed to the old man who had turned into a corpse to express his gratitude. Although he was an enemy, the fact that the old man used a sword told him that the dangers in this world were far more than just supernatural forces. Under certain conditions, the seemingly backward cold weapons could also exert great power. Perhaps it was because of the rapid advancement of mages recently, or perhaps it was because of the influence of the mages in Lincoln City that Andre gradually despised those close combat professions who relied on their bodies and weapons to fight. He thought that they were just barbarians who fought with their muscles. No matter how strong they were, they could not threaten him who had mastered many arcane spells. However, after today's experience, he would never look down on any profession again. After all, once was enough. If he made the same mistake a second time, it would be a problem of IQ. He was not stupid to that extent. Seeing that the enemy had completely fallen, Fiona, who was standing behind and aiming with her flintlock for a long time, rushed over and asked with concern, "How are you? Is your wound okay?" Since the two of them entered the close combat phase, she had been trying to shoot from the back. Unfortunately, the old man did not give her such a chance. In addition, the accuracy of the musket had never been good. Once she opened fire, it was uncertain who would be hit. Don't worry, the trachea and nerves weren't injured, and the artery that was cut open has already healed. The remaining small wound can be fixed with a bottle of medicine. As he spoke, Andre took out a bottle of potion that he had concocted himself, pulled out the cork, and drank it. The wound on his neck quickly healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, other than a red mark, not even a scar was left. He gently touched the wound, and after confirming that it had really died, he secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In this world where medical science was extremely backward, tetanus was no laughing matter. In addition, the southern region was hot and humid, and there were all kinds of terrifying mosquitoes. Just thinking about it made his scalp tingle. He didn't want to be infected with any troublesome bacteria or viruses. Silently thanking Olair for his unscientific healing magic, Andre bent down to pick up Neil's rapier and carefully examined it. This was because he knew that this weapon, which could block the mithril machete to a certain extent, was definitely not ordinary. Especially the golden sparks that burst out when the blade collided with each other. Ordinary steel could not do that. Quite a rare cold forging process. Using folding forging and this unusual hardness. So it's manganese steel? No wonder it could block the mithril machete. There's also a row of small words engraved here. Arcane should be the name of the forger. Because of his intermediate forging specialty, Andre didn't take long to analyze all the materials and forging methods of the rapier. At the same time, he was quite surprised that there was actually someone in this world who could refine manganese steel. Manganese was a high-strength anti-wear metal, and smelting it required a high temperature of at least 1,000 degrees. Apart from magic, he really couldn't think of how an ordinary furnace could reach such a high temperature. Of course, in addition to manganese steel, there was also a small amount of adamantine mixed in the blade, and from the complicated patterns on the guard, there was also a special magic attribute. But unfortunately, he didn't recognize this magic pattern and temporarily couldn't use identification spells, so there was no way to judge at all. But one thing was certain, and that was that this rapier was definitely very precious, at least much better than the ones he forged himself. Without any hesitation, Andre directly took off the gray scabbard from the corpse, fixed it on his belt, and then continued to search on the corpse. Not long after, he found a notebook that recorded a strange poem and a small amount of gold coins and gems. But he was a little strange. Why would a pirate vice captain, a master swordsman, carry a book of nonsensical poems with him? And just the grammar alone could be found no less than 100, and the wrong words were even more numerous. If the other party was really a boorish pirate, it would be understandable. But no matter whether it was from the way Neil talked, his manners, or his clothes, all of it showed that he had received a good education and could even be the illegitimate son of a noble, or he himself was a fallen noble and definitely shouldn't have written something of this level. Just as Andre frowned and was trying to find something, he suddenly heard a shout from afar. Looking up, he found that the warships docked at the bay had suddenly released countless small boats and began to slowly move towards the small island. The number was at least 5 times more than before. But he didn't show the slightest bit of panic, and instead, the corner of his mouth was slightly raised, and he said with a cold smile, "Humph, finally a reaction? Just what I want. Fiona, pack up the necessary things. Our chance is here." "Yes." The girl didn't ask why, but only nodded and quickly ran into the blacksmith shop. A few minutes later, she ran out with a small bag on her back. In addition to gold and silver coins, there was only a small amount of food and a water bag, and finally, a small hammer used for blacksmithing in her hand, and it seemed that she intended to use it as her weapon. Although she wasn't very smart, but she knew that she must not bring too many things with her when escaping, or else she would be caught by the enemy before long. "Very good. As a newbie, you didn't bring any useless burdens." Andre nodded with satisfaction and praised with a smile. Chapter 479. Thank you for your compliment, but this is not my credit, but the teachings of the great Lord of Raging Flame. He has just instilled a lot of knowledge and information into my brain, and I can refer to it at any time. Fiona immediately showed a fanatical expression as she spoke. Hearing the girl's explanation, Andre nodded thoughtfully. "Well, in that case, he should have also taught you combat skills, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be carrying a small hammer in your hand." As everyone knew, there was a special connection between priests and the god they served. When the priest prayed, the god would respond. Similarly, if the god had any tasks, he would also give the priest hints through dreams. Generally speaking, in order to maintain the balance of power within the church, the god would not raise the level of a priest for no reason, nor would he easily impart a large amount of knowledge to a priest alone. However, the situation of the fire elemental prince, Aesop Desir, was somewhat different. Due to being isolated from the material world for a long time, the number of his priests was getting fewer and fewer. In addition, he never cared about the number of believers and only desired to be respected by mortals, so most ordinary people would never regard him as their guardian. It was hard to say whether the number of priests was 0 or not. Perhaps it was for this reason that he paid special attention to this girl who had just been forcibly converted into a priest. He even did not hesitate to waste time to teach her personally in order to quickly expand the priest team and restore the glory of hundreds of years ago. Fiona had no idea that she had been regarded as a key person to be trained. She gently waved the hammer in her hand twice and replied, "Yes, I have a lot of methods to use blunt weapons in my head, and what I lack now is practice. I believe that as long as I have a good body, I can also be like a real priest, use divine spells, break through enemy lines, and spread the name of the Lord of Raging Flame." Haha, then I'll look forward to it. Let's go. Before the pirates notice what's happening here, we have to sneak onto the ship as soon as possible. After saying that, Andre stuffed the notebook into his pocket and quickly moved in the direction of the beach. In order to ensure that he would not be discovered, he specifically chose the lush bushes to enter. Because he had lost too much blood just now, his movements were not fast. Not long after, he encountered a small group of pirates who had just landed. Without any hesitation, Andre immediately stopped, pulled Fiona into his arms, and covered her mouth. At the same time, he put a finger on his lips and made a silent gesture. The girl was obviously startled by the sudden movement, but when she saw the fire coming from not far away, she immediately shut her mouth. She hugged Andre's waist with one hand and the hammer in her other hand, trying to completely hide herself. The two plump and seductive weapons in front of her chest were squeezed out of shape because she was using too much force. Coupled with the fact that she was only wearing a small vest that exposed her navel, she looked particularly seductive. The two of them were so close together that they could easily feel each other's body temperature, breathing, and heartbeat. After all, they were young men and women with normal physiology, and because they were sweating from running just now that they were so close together, it was natural for them to have some physiological reactions. Especially Andre, who had already tasted the taste of a woman. A certain part of his body began to fill with blood and soon pressed against the other party's lower abdomen. Fiona obviously knew what it was. Her body instantly became a little stiff, and she subconsciously bit her lower lip. A faint blush appeared on her wheat-colored face, and her eyes were almost dripping with water. She was full of shyness, but there was no rejection, which quickly ignited a ball of lust in Andre's heart. Since leaving the territory, he had not touched a woman for more than a month, so his hands unconsciously went deep into her short skirt, stroking her slender and healthy thighs, as well as her perky and elastic buttocks. The atmosphere suddenly became ambiguous. Just when this pair of dry firewood was about to ignite the passion, the swaying pirates finally came nearby. These guys were all holding torches, looking around vigilantly. One of them, who was the leader, used a curved sword to hack the grass, and cursed loudly while gnashing his teeth. Damn it! These bastards were so busy having fun that they forgot Captain Kent's order, and now we have to go ashore to search. That's right. I found several women's corpses near the wooden house in front, and they killed them after they had enough fun. They didn't think about us who stayed on the ship. Sigh, what a pity. Those women were quite young. If it wasn't too bloody, I could still put up with it. Another pirate angrily agreed. It had to be said that this guy was quite perverted. He could actually talk about corpses as if nothing had happened, and from the reaction of the other pirates, it seemed that they did not care about it at all. All right, don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and cheer me up. Quickly find the people. I don't want to be whipped when I return late. The leader of the pirates loudly berated. Hee, don't worry. Even if Captain wants to use flogging, it will definitely not be us, but these idiots who forgot the order. That's right. I dare to bet. This time there will be at least 5 people hanging on the mast with their heads down. Ha ha! I bet a gold coin. The number of people must be more than 10. Captain Kent has always hated subordinates who do not listen to orders. This time someone will suffer. I bet 2. I bet 5. For a moment, the pirates suddenly took out their gold coins and began to gamble, not noticing that there were 2 bright eyes watching them in the darkness. Although Andre had long heard about how bad the discipline of the pirates was, after seeing it with his own eyes today, he realized that he still underestimated the free and undisciplined nature of this motley crew. It was no wonder that they had gathered so much wealth, manpower, and warships, but were beaten back to their original state in the naval battle with Lincoln City time and time again. They could only hide in the Sardinia Islands and do the business of looting. Even if they occasionally broke into a small city, they would just plunder and retreat with no intention of expanding. It was not that the previous pirate kings did not have foresight, but they really could not pull out an army that could be used to maintain order, let alone control the pirates' crazy behavior of killing, robbing, raping, and fireproofing. When they had enough, the entire city would be completely turned into ruins, and there was no value in occupying it all. Seeing that the other party was like a child's play and actually started gambling during a mission, Andre naturally did not intend to be polite. He gently pushed away Fiona, who was sticking to him. At the same time, made a gesture to calm down. He tiptoed and carefully approached the guy closest to him from behind. He just happened to have a ball of fire burning in his heart, so he planned to use killing to distract himself. Otherwise, he might not be able to control himself and launch an intense field battle. Chapter 480. Although the Rogueblade Master was not a master of stealth and hiding like the Rogueblade Master, he still had some similar characteristics to the Rogueblade Master. Coupled with the skills he had honed in the Dark Forest, he was able to sneak up on them without alerting anyone. Without any hesitation, Andre covered his target's nose and mouth from behind. Following that, he used the manganese steel rapier he had just obtained to pierce his opponent's brainstem. He then gently placed him on the ground. The entire process took less than 2 seconds, and not a single sound was made. After killing a pirate, he did not choose to stop. Instead, he continued to approach his second target. As the sky was completely dark, most of the pirates' attention was attracted by the gambling. They did not notice that the number of people in the team was decreasing. In the end, only a few pirates were left in a circle counting their winnings. One must know that sailing on the sea was a very boring thing. Often, they would not see the shadow of other ships for several days. Not only did they have to constantly work hard, but there was also no entertainment. Thus, they would more or less develop a lot of bad habits, such as drinking, smoking, gambling, and so on. Especially the last one, it could be said that everyone knew how to do it. As long as there was an opportunity, these boorish sailors would gather together and use anything, including dice, to gamble. They would not stop until they had lost their last copper coin. Just as Andre was about to finish off the last few pirates, the leading pirate suddenly stopped his movements. He raised his head and sniffed his nose vigilantly. In an instant, his expression changed drastically. He shouted at the top of his voice, "Alert! Enemy! Where? Damn it! I can smell blood. Be careful. There's an assassin around us." In a short span of 10 seconds, the remaining pirates quickly reacted. They raised the torches in their hands and looked around, trying to find the enemy hiding in the surroundings. Seeing this scene, Andre could not help but sigh inwardly. He knew that his sneak attack would end here, so he stood up and walked out of the darkness with graceful steps. He bowed slightly to the other party. "Everyone, good evening. I didn't think that there would be someone with such a sensitive nose that could detect the smell of blood and death in the sea breeze. You know, I wanted to give you a quick death, but I'm afraid I can't do that now." After saying that, a strange smile appeared on his face. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. "Pa!" Fiona, who was hiding not far away, did not say a word. She raised the flintlock in her hand, aimed at the crowd, and pulled the trigger immediately. Bang! Bang! Accompanied by the flames, loud noises, and white smoke, the two unlucky fellows fell to the ground. One of them had a big hole in his chest and died on the spot, while the other's left shoulder was badly mutilated. The simple leather armor didn't protect him at all. He fell to the ground and let out a painful howl. After the successful attack, the girl with 4 guns didn't stop. She quickly put the empty gun back in her belt and pulled out the other 2 guns. She aimed at the enemy and pulled the trigger. Bang! Bang! Another 2 loud bangs rang out, and 2 more of the remaining 3 pirates fell. This time, no one died on the spot, but their thighs were severely injured, and they couldn't even stand up. "Oh, devil! A demon's weapon!" The leader of the pirates saw his men inexplicably fall down one after another. His spirit was greatly stimulated. He shouted and threw down the torch, turned around and ran. He was afraid that if he heard another gunshot, he would also fall to the ground. However, he had apparently forgotten that running around in the dark like a headless fly was a very dangerous thing, especially on a tropical island where there were as many vines and plants as there were hairs on a cow. After running for a few steps, he tripped and fell. Devil? Ha ha! How dare you say that? Look at those wooden houses that were burned by you, and look at the innocent residents who died tragically. Who is the devil? You know, I hate trash like you who only know how to destroy but don't create any value, so go to hell. As Andre spoke, he quickly rushed forward. At the moment when the other party was about to get up, he fiercely pierced the manganese steel rapier into the right eye. Not only did it destroy the brain, but it also pierced through the skull and came out from the back of the head, bringing with it a large amount of dark red blood and white brain matter. After killing the leader, he immediately turned around and aimed at the pirates who were lying on the ground and struggling in pain. He did not have the slightest intention of being lenient. In just a few seconds, he ended the evil lives of the pirates. As for Fiona, she first used an unfamiliar technique to load the flintlock. Then she took all the valuable items on the pirates, such as gold and silver coins and precious jewelry, and put them into the bag behind her. She did not even let go of the gold teeth in their mouths. She directly smashed them with the small hammer in her hand. Piracy was a high-risk profession. They could die at any time. Therefore, most of them would make a small part of their income into gold earrings, necklaces, nose rings, rings, and so on, so that they could have a decent funeral after they died. According to the ancient tradition, no matter who obtained the treasures on the corpse of a pirate, they must hold a simple ceremony. Otherwise, they would be subjected to a terrible curse. Although this kind of groundless thing was very unreliable, most people would rather believe in it than not. Anyway, they had obtained benefits, and it would not take much effort to hold a simple sea burial. However, Fiona had long hated the pirates to the core. She could not wait to tear them into pieces. Therefore, she did not show any mercy. Often, with a hammer, she would beat the corpse beyond recognition. Then, she would grab the bloody jewelry, wipe it clean, and put it away. She did not have the slightest scruple about the so-called curse. Seeing the girl's skillful method of removing the corpse, Andre could not help but secretly praise her. He thought that she was indeed a good girl who was diligent and thrifty. When Chloe searched for trophies, she had always only picked those weapons and jewelry that were inlaid with gems and looked very precious. As for the belongings on the corpse, she would not even touch them. It was said that the nobles would never take away the last burial item on the deceased. Otherwise, it would lose the noble's dignity and become the laughingstock of the upper-class society. However, in Andre's view, this was just because the nobles looked down on the ordinary goods. After all, they were all rich. Naturally, they would not care about things that were worth more than a dozen gold coins. Instead of greedily swallowing the last copper coin, it was better to put on a noble appearance. If it was a magical item, it was guaranteed that they would snatch it faster than anyone else. Chapter 481. Just as Andre was silently criticizing the so-called rules of the nobles, there was a sudden commotion in the distant forest, followed by the appearance of a large number of torches. It was obvious that these guys were the pirates who had rushed over after hearing the gunshot. Their numbers were quite right, and they seemed to have discussed it beforehand. They surrounded them from all directions, leaving no gap at all. If they tried to force their way in, they would immediately be besieged by hundreds of people. It seems that our movement just now was quite big, and it seems to have attracted all the enemies here. Andre had a faint smile on his face and said contemptuously. From his expression, it could be seen that he did not put the other party in his eyes at all. What are you going to do? In the current situation, I'm afraid that we can only force our way in, right? Fiona asked very nervously. Andre shook his head and quickly took out the last 2 bottles of invisibility potion from his pocket. No, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I can deal with hundreds of ferocious pirates now. Here, drink this bottle of potion. Remember, no matter what happens later, don't make a sound or make any threatening movements. This is... Fiona looked at the liquid in the bottle with a faint magical halo in surprise. Invisibility potion it can let us stay invisible for about 10 minutes. Drink it quickly, or it'll be too late. After saying that, Andre quickly drank his bottle, then immediately grabbed the girl's hand and disappeared. Really invisible. Fiona, who was exposed to magic for the first time, stared at the invisible Andre beside her and fell into a sluggish state. If they were not holding each other's hand, she would not dare to believe what she saw with her own eyes. But now was not the time to be stunned. In just a few seconds, the pirates had narrowed the encirclement to less than 50 meters. The girl did not have time to think much, and she also drank the potion full of magical energy in one gulp, and her figure quickly disappeared without a trace. Seeing that Fiona's invisibility potion was starting to take effect, Andre did not have time to think. He immediately led her carefully through the two pirates and headed towards the small boat by the shore. He was very clear that he had to sneak into the ship's hold before the effects of the invisibility potion wore off and find a suitable place to hide. Otherwise, everything he'd done before would be in vain. He'd be safe as long as he could reach Valence City safely. Of course, this wasn't easy, especially when playing hide-and-seek with a large group of pirates in a crowded cabin. If he wasn't careful, he would be discovered, and there was no other choice but to jump into the sea. Obviously, Andre, who had experience drifting on the sea, didn't want to jump into the sea at all. Therefore, the real test only began now. Invisibility was a level 2 arcane spell that spellcasters love the most. At the same time, it was also one of the spells with the widest range of applications. Invisibility potions were the dream of countless professionals. Some experienced thieves could even use them to steal precious magic items and treasures from dragon lairs. However, this kind of potion was not without its flaws. The biggest problem was that once the user entered the state of invisibility, neither enemies nor allies would be able to pinpoint their location. Therefore, there was a high chance of being accidentally injured. As a mage, Andre was naturally very clear on this point. Thus, after the potion took effect, he held onto Fiona's hand the entire time. He didn't let go even after jumping onto the small boat and rowing. This was because he knew that if he let go now, he wouldn't even have time to react if an accident happened. He would either have to give up on the girl or expose himself. No matter what, the outcome wouldn't be good. In order to ensure that the entire process of sneaking in was foolproof, Andre sacrificed speed and chose to gently paddle the boat. He tried his best to make the small boat look like it was slowly being blown away from the beach by the tide or the sea breeze, slowly drawing closer to the enormous pirate ship. Fortunately, most of the pirates had been lured into the shrubbery by the sound of the suction gun. Otherwise, they would have been dragged back by the remaining pirates before they could even get a few dozen meters off the beach. The empty small wooden boat was half rowing and half drifting. Unknowingly, it was getting closer and closer to the Sea Wolf, which had a displacement of about 650 tons. Finally, when the potion's effect was about to wear off, it crashed into the hull with a loud bang. Don't underestimate this ship just because it had a small displacement. Generally, pirate ships were not too big in pursuit of speed. Moreover, their bodies were long and narrow. This was because they had to be able to catch up with merchant ships and also outrun the warships of various cities. If they were too big, it would be easy to have problems in terms of structure. Furthermore, the number of ballistas on the deck was not small at all. The pirate who was guarding the top of the mast obviously noticed this. He immediately shouted to his companions below, "An empty ship has been spotted on the starboard side. Immediately send someone to see what's going on. If any idiot didn't park the ship properly, you must report to the captain and let the captain skin him alive." "Got it. I'll go down and take a look." Another pirate who was patrolling on the deck agreed. He stood up unwillingly and put down a mooring rope. He climbed down skillfully, intending to see if there was really no one on the ship. Andre, who was in the invisible state, took advantage of this opportunity and quickly carried Fiona on his back. Without saying anything, he grabbed the rope and lightly kicked the small boat a distance away. He then jumped onto the deck and ran straight to the stairs that led to the lower cabin. Since he drank the invisibility potion, he had been silently calculating the time in his heart. In less than a minute, the two of them would be exposed on the deck where there was no place to hide. It was undoubtedly suicidal. Just when the two of them had just entered the cabin, the pirate who was in charge of checking the small boat suddenly realized that he was getting further and further away from the sea-wolf. He quickly jumped and grabbed the rope that was hanging down tightly. He cursed loudly, "Damn it! The wind and waves tonight are really big. I actually didn't pay attention, and it almost blew me out. Ha ha! Idiot! Who told you not to fasten the ship?" A pirate who passed by did not help. Instead, he opened his mouth wide and revealed a mouthful of yellow and black teeth. He was gloating. To them, anything that could mediate their boring lives could be used as a joke. This time was no exception. "Bullsh asterisk T. Quickly pull me up. I don't want to get myself wet in the middle of the night." "Hee hee. Buddy, I'm sorry. We just wanted to see the scene of you falling into the sea." As he said that, the pirate who was lying on the side of the ship suddenly pulled out his scimitar. A mischievous expression appeared on his face as he instantly cut the rope. Chapter 482. Splash. The unlucky guy who was originally hanging on the rope fell into the sea, causing the other pirates on the ship to burst into laughter. They pointed at him as if they were discussing how embarrassing it was to enter the water. They did not notice that two strangers had already sneaked into the cabin. The Sea-Wolf was a typical traditional double-decker galleon. In order to facilitate hand-to-hand combat, it used a high chord, a high stern, a low deck, and a flat stern. There was a protrusion at the bow of the ship, like the ram used for rowing. An independent ballista was placed there, used to launch a long-range attack on the target in front. From afar, it looked like an overturned lobster with a very large arc. The characteristic of this kind of ship was that there were enough cabins in the hull for storing goods, arranging accommodation, and living quarters for the crew. At the same time, there were enough masts and sails. The combination of horizontal sails and triangular sails could cope with a variety of wind directions. Compared to those ordinary merchant ships that were as bloated as a bathtub, it had an overwhelming speed advantage. In addition, due to the amazing height of the stern and the ship's side, when the two ships met, the pirates could launch an attack from above, especially the stern, which was especially suitable for shooting arrows and crossbows. Often, a few rounds of shots could cause a lot of casualties to the enemy. In general, the Sea-Wolf used a design that was between a carrack and a Spanish galleon. In terms of the sailing level of this world, it could be considered as the top. The only drawback was that it required a lot of people to operate. In addition, because the hull was slightly bigger, it had a very deep draft. It was very suitable for shallow water. In addition, the center of gravity was not stable enough. Once it encountered a terrible storm, there was a possibility of capsizing. As a sailboat mystery, Andre figured out the internal structure of the ship not long after entering the cabin. He quickly brought Fiona to the place where the ballast was stored at the bottom. According to his experience, that should be the safest hiding place for the entire ship. Generally speaking, as long as there were not too many things that could not be stored, no one would be bored enough to go inside. However, just as the two of them passed through the first deck, the duration of the invisibility potion finally ended. A strange fluctuation suddenly appeared in the air, followed by a head, neck, torso, legs, and feet. Damn it! How could something go wrong at such a critical moment? Andre frowned and cursed in a low voice. He dragged Fiona and quickly hid in the warehouse closest to him. He carefully stuck out half of his head and stared at the stairs leading to the lowest floor not far ahead. A shirtless pirate was yawning in boredom as he sat by the stairs. The pipe in his mouth emitted red sparks and white smoke from time to time, reducing the visibility of the already dim corridor. Perhaps it was because of this that he didn't notice the figure that flashed by just now. Obviously, this guy was the legendary treasure guard, responsible for ensuring that the spoils of war on the ship would not be stolen by any crew members. In most pirate groups, they would use the method of election and voting to choose the most trustworthy and powerful person. He did not need to participate in battles or do any physical work. He only needed to guard the stolen treasures every day until the treasures were sold and distributed to everyone. This person was called a treasure guard. Since he could stand out among hundreds of pirates, naturally he would not be weak. He He was at least a level 3 professional and was very difficult to deal with. The most important thing was that Andre did not dare to kill people at the moment. Otherwise, once the pirates found that the treasure guard was missing, they would soon conduct a search of the entire ship. By then, no matter where the treasure guard was hidden, he would be found. The loss outweighed the gain. Just when he was secretly thinking about how to go to the lowest floor, there was a sudden sound of footsteps in a narrow corridor. After a while, a middle-aged man with short black hair and a full beard came up from the lower floor. He first glanced at the treasure guard with a cold gaze, then lowered his voice and said, "Cruz, when I went down just now, no one approached me, right?" No one, but there was a rat. "Do you want me to help you catch him?" After saying that, the treasure guard named Cruz opened his sleepy eyes and instantly released a sharp light that was as sharp as a knife. The man's mouth slightly raised, showing a playful expression, and nodded gently. "Oh, a rat? Let's get him out then. It just so happens that I also want to see who has the guts to sneak into the cabin of the Sea Wolf without permission." After receiving the order, Cruz calmly took off his pipe and gently exhaled the last white smoke in his mouth. He poured the ashes into the clay jar at the side, slowly pulled out the broadsword hanging at his waist, and slowly walked forward. As he walked, he teased, "Little rat, I advise you to not resist, otherwise you may get hurt." Seeing that the other party was getting closer and closer, Fiona immediately began to become nervous. She turned her head and stared into Andre's eyes, as if to say, "We've been discovered." Andre's face was a little ugly at the moment. He did not expect that he would still fail at the last moment after making so many preparations. However, he did not have the habit of surrendering to the enemy without a fight. Thus, he quickly took out Mage Armor Potion, Bull Strength Potion, and Agility Potion from his waist pouch and drank them all in one gulp. Then, he pushed Fiona to the back of the shelf and walked out with his rapier, bowing slightly to the two people. "I'm very sorry for boarding this ship without permission, but there's a reason for this. Can you pretend that you didn't see anything and let me hide in the bottom cabin for a while? I'm willing to pay a handsome reward for this, as long as we safely reach Valen City." Hearing this, Cruz's face instantly revealed an expression of disbelief. He turned around and looked at the middle-aged man, then laughed and spread his hands. "Ha ha ha! What an interesting young man, and at the same time, also bold. You actually have the courage to negotiate in this situation. If it was under normal circumstances, I wouldn't mind making things easier for you. But unfortunately, Seawolf Captain Kent is standing behind us. Even if I agree, he won't allow it. So it's better for you to put down your weapon and surrender obediently. Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and catch him. Don't be careless. Don't you see that he's holding Neil's weapon?" The middle-aged man called Kent urged in a low voice. Chapter 483. As the supreme leader of this pirate ship, he could recognize the exquisite patterns and gauntlets on the thin sword at a glance. He knew that it was his vice-captain's most beloved sword. Now that it had fallen into the hands of another person, there was only one possibility, and that was that the vice-captain was seriously injured or dead. Otherwise, it would not have become someone else's spoils of war. The vice-captain's weapon. Cruz was shocked. He stared at the rapier with his eyes wide open. Soon, his cynical expression was replaced by seriousness and vigilance. As a pure swordsman, he knew Neil's level of swordsmanship better than anyone else. It was not an exaggeration to call him a master, especially when combined with the rogue swordsman's special ability, Crafty Strike. Even a high-grade fighter above level 10 would inevitably suffer a great loss. Now that the young man in front of him was holding the vice-captain's favorite weapon, it meant that he must be dead. Whether he was killed by a sneak attack, a plot, a trap, or a head-on battle, it meant that the young man had a way to kill a professional above level 6. If he was not careful, he would probably be the next to die. Pirates were not knights and nobles full of honor. They did not mind the so-called despicable means. As long as they could achieve their goal, they would even give their wives to the young man. In fact, they advocated strategy more than anyone else. They liked to exchange the smallest loss for the biggest victory. Otherwise, every time they robbed, they would suffer heavy casualties. It would not be long before the pirate ship and its captain became notorious, and they would not be able to recruit enough crew members. Boy, although I don't know what method you use to kill Vice Captain Neal, it won't work on me. After saying that, Cruz pulled out a round shield the size of a human face and put it on his wrist like a magic trick. Although he was full of confidence, he was very careful in his actions. He even took out a small round shield that could block flexibly. He was definitely the most difficult opponent to deal with. As everyone knew, the lighter and shorter the weapon, the faster it would be to use it. For example, a short sword or a dagger would always be much faster than a long sword. It was very suitable for blocking and parrying. The same principle applied to shields. Although a tower shield could cover more than 80% of the body area, it was too heavy. It was not an ideal shield in close combat. Most of the time, it was good for blocking arrows. If it was used in close combat, it was purely an act of seeking death. Not to mention, the weight alone was enough to consume more than half of the physical strength of the wielder, not to mention the need to raise it to block. It was estimated that the enemy's sword would have pierced through the vital point before the shield could reach the defensive position. A big shield like this was usually used in infantry phalanxes. At least 50 to 100 people were deployed. They closely formed a seamless shield wall, pushing the enemy, and then hid behind the shield to deliver the final blow. As for individual combat, depending on the individual's arm strength, physical strength, and other factors, one would generally use a medium shield or a small shield. A small round shield might seem unremarkable, but in the eyes of many experts, it was the most suitable shield for close combat. Especially when dealing with light weapons like rapiers, it would have a very good restraining effect. Andre obviously knew this. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He subconsciously touched the hilt of his mithril scimitar and silently prayed that the opponent's shield was not too strong. Otherwise, he would have no hope of winning. At this moment, he was already regretting that he rashly broke into the lower cabin. If he knew that there were two such troublesome enemies, he would have hidden in the opponent's junk cabin. Now, he could neither advance nor retreat. Even jumping into the sea to escape had become an extravagant hope. Cruz bent down slightly, raised his broadsword, and began to approach slowly. At the same time, the shield was placed in front of his chest to protect his vital points. He did not give the opponent any chance to attack. Seeing that the strategy of sneak attack did not work, Andre immediately changed his tactics. He let go of his scimitar and directly pulled out another rapier. He gently moved his wrist and stepped forward. In such a narrow space as the cabin corridor, there was no place to move or dodge at all. Therefore, plots and tricks were not of much use. Instead of wasting energy to play tricks, it was better to concentrate on the battle and create a glimmer of hope for victory for himself. Fiona, who was hiding behind a shelf, raised her flintlock and nervously aimed at the front. Once Andre was in danger, she would immediately pull the trigger and shoot the lead pellet. As for whether it would alarm the other pirates on the ship, it was not within her consideration. Closer and closer, closer and closer. Just when the distance between the two was less than 5 meters, Cruz suddenly accelerated and rushed forward. He thrust his broadsword at an extremely fast speed and directly stabbed the opponent's left shoulder. There was no doubt that this was a probing attack to test the opponent's reaction speed, strength, and swordsmanship skills so that he could be prepared for the next battle. Generally speaking, the shoulder was one of the few places that were difficult to defend. Experienced fighters could often see through many tricks, especially those who had been using the same weapon for a long time. They usually had a variety of habits, and experts could make full use of these habits to gain an advantage. But unfortunately, Andre had only been a wandering swordsman for a few hours. There was no such thing as a habit. Even when he was in Lonely Mountain Town, the most commonly used weapons were spears and javelins. It had nothing to do with swords. He directly crossed his rapier and blocked the broadsword. Then, he lifted his leg and kicked the opponent's knee. Thump! Cruz instantly knelt on one knee. His face was full of disbelief. He could not believe that someone dared to make such an arrogant and bold attack in a swordsmanship contest. Did he not know how to write the word death? Legs were equivalent to the roots of a big tree for a fighter. Those who had undergone professional training would not easily jump or kick because it meant that their lower body was unstable. Once they suffered a fatal attack and were unable to react in time, they would either be pierced by a sharp blade or die from a heavy blow from a blunt weapon. Fighting scenes like those in movies and animes would never exist in a real battle unless there was no gravity. Otherwise, it would be a live target. However, Andre cannot care so much now. He immediately waved his rapier and launched a series of stabs in an attempt to penetrate the opponent's defense. But the small round shield, made of unknown materials, perfectly blocked every attack. Even the manganese steel rapier mixed with fine gold could only leave a dent of less than 2 millimeters on the surface. Chapter 484. Damn it, this tortoiseshell is really hard. He secretly cursed. Using all his strength, he suddenly threw out the ordinary steel rapier as a hidden weapon. Then he pulled out his mithril scimitar and immediately slashed horizontally. During the whole process, he raised his body's coordination ability to the extreme. He didn't give the enemy a chance to breathe at all. With the help of the bull's strength potion and the agility potion, Andre's strength had exceeded 15 points, and his dexterity had exceeded 20 points. Coupled with the bonus of the weapon proficiency on light weapons, he was like a leopard pouncing on its prey. In just a short moment, he had rushed to the front. In fact, whether it was the so-called martial arts or swordsmanship, they couldn't escape from 2 points, speed and strength. All skills revolve around these two attributes. If the gap was too big, then even the best skills couldn't make up for the huge gap in strength. Obviously, Cruz wasn't an agile fighter. He couldn't attack 3 points at the same time. So he made a prompt decision to tighten all the muscles in his body, including his abdomen muscles, and forcibly clamped the rapier flying towards him. Then he swung his broadsword to block the attack of the other rapier. Finally, he used his shield to block the horizontal slash of the mithril scimitar. Boy, you're dead. I'm going to skin you alive. The injured Cruz's eyes were red. He swung his rapier backward and then roared angrily. Andre couldn't dodge in time. His leather armor was cut open, and the leather bag hanging on his waist was also damaged. The things inside all fell to the ground. Just when he wanted to take a few steps back, Seawolf Kent, who had been standing at the stairs, suddenly moved. He rushed to Cruz's side at lightning speed. A strange smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Then he didn't hesitate to stab the rapier in his hand into the gap between Cruz's ribs. He successfully destroyed one of the most important organs of the human body, the heart. You. Cruz didn't expect that the captain would kill him for no reason at all. He stretched out a finger and trembled. His eyes were filled with horror and resentment. Soon he breathed his last. Even until his death, he did not understand what had happened and why the other party wanted to kill him. He slowly collapsed in the narrow corridor. Blood quickly flowed out of his wounds, forming a dark red pool. After doing all this, Kent drew out his long sword and rubbed it against the corpse. He then took 2 steps forward and picked up a gold coin from the ground. He placed it under the oil lamp and examined it carefully. This gold coin was completely different from the others. Its surface was as smooth as a mirror, but in the dim light, it reflected dark patterns like a spider web. There was also a spider at the center of the web. Depending on the angle of the light, it would show different shapes. It was the gift that the legendary Lich gave to Andre. After observing for a few seconds, Ken immediately put away his weapon and offered the gold coin with both hands. At the same time, he knelt on one knee and bowed deeply. I'm very sorry. No one recognized you just now, esteemed webweaver. My name is Kent Kashi, an insignificant servant. I'm at your service at any time. After that, he gently kissed the spider on the surface of the gold coin. His eyes showed a fanatical look as if he had seen the god he believed in. You are. Andre narrowed his eyes and deliberately dragged out the word. Although the Lich said that this little thing could bring him some good luck when he gave the gold coin to him and used it to balance the gap between him and Loretta Botons, he did not explain the specific use of the gold coin, so he didn't dare to casually answer. I'm a third-level member of a shadow web, codenamed Foot. I'm responsible for lurking among the pirates and waiting for the opportunity to move. There are several captains and other personnel who sneak in with me. If you need, we can mobilize at least 12 ships and 2,000 fierce pirates at any time. As long as you give the order, even if it's the Pirate King's lair, it won't be a problem. Kent clenched his fist and said in a very excited tone. He didn't know what means the legendary lich used to control a person's mind and make him give everything without reservation. Even in the face of death, he didn't have a trace of fear. Charge into the Pirate King's lair. The corner of Andre's mouth drew a beautiful arc as he shook his head with a smile. Do you think I'm the kind of idiot who doesn't know his place? Or do you think that the top castle of Valen City can be taken down by a mere 2,000 motley crew? As a powerful actor, he easily let himself enter the mode of a villain boss. His entire body emitted an evil aura, especially the sinister coldness in his eyes. Even in a situation where the ambient temperature was over 30 degrees, it still gave people the illusion of a chill. Of course, all of this was only on the surface. What he needed to do was to quickly understand the meaning of the coin, as well as what kind of organization the Shadow Web was, how big it was, who was in charge of controlling it, and how much of it he could make use of. Kent clearly didn't know that this was a test, and still replied with great fervor, "No, respected web weaver, after many years of infiltration, we have people in every corner of the Sardinia Islands. Even though they don't have many people, they can immediately start a large-scale rebellion as long as you give the order. Even if they can't completely destroy Pirate King Francis's rule, they can make him lose control of most of the pirates. When that time comes, you only need to raise your arms and shout loudly, and you'll quickly gain the support of more than half of the pirates. Then you can contact the underground guilds in Valen City. I believe that those smugglers and gang members will quickly understand who can truly bring the benefits. Sir, perhaps you still don't know, but the truth is that the guard captain stationed in the castle, Yvonne, fell into my hands over a month ago. Perhaps I can use this to threaten him and force him to open the door at a critical moment. This way, it's not impossible to directly attack and take over." After hearing the other party's explanation, Andre instantly felt his heart palpitate. He completely didn't expect that the Sardinia Islands pirates, the #1 enemy of Lincoln City, had unknowingly and slowly fallen into the control of a huge organization. It had to be known that this was a pirate alliance with at least 300 warships that could simultaneously launch attacks on more than half of the trade routes of the Green Sea Alliance. In addition, there were close to 10,000 valiant sailors. If they attacked a city at all costs, then no matter how powerful the city was, it would suffer heavy losses. At the very least, the entire port would be turned into ruins. Chapter 485. This was also why Lincoln City would form an alliance with other cities every once in a while to carry out a regular crusade against the pirates. The purpose was to reduce their numbers before they grew stronger and prevent them from attacking the cities. In addition to the above, Andre also noticed that Kent had called himself the Net Weaver twice in a row. If he guessed correctly, it should be a high-ranking position in the organization. In order to further confirm, he deliberately raised his chin slightly and asked arrogantly, "In that case, why haven't you done anything yet? Is there no other Net Weaver in charge of this area?" "I'm very sorry, Your Excellency. After the last Net Weaver gave the order to infiltrate, he hasn't appeared for many years. We don't even know if he's a man or a woman, how old he is, or if he's still alive. So, you're now the only Net Weaver in the Shadow Web in the entire Sardinia Islands, and you might even be the only Net Weaver in the southern area. I'm just a subordinate who follows orders and don't have the right to know too much, so I can't provide you with too much information in this regard. If you want to know more about the Net Weaver, please contact the counselor you belong to." After saying that, a trace of helplessness appeared on Kent's face. Although he could be considered a big leader in the organization and secretly controlled hundreds of secret members, as long as he had enough time, it would be easy for him to overthrow the rule of the Pirate King Francis. It would not even be difficult for him to become the new Pirate King. But it was a pity that the Shadow Web was not an amusement park where you could come and go as you pleased. Once you joined, you could not leave for life. Sometimes, even an entire family would be implicated and become a member for generations. If anyone dared to betray or act without authorization, it was very likely that they would be beheaded immediately before the plan was ready. Because the Shadow Web used multiple organizational structures, this also meant that a lowly pawn was likely to be an expert in disguise, specifically in charge of supervising and cleaning up traitors. No one knew who exactly it was. However, there was one thing that could be confirmed. After joining the organization for so many years, Kent had never seen any disloyal person who could live for more than 3 days. Therefore, he did not want to use his head to test who exactly was the liquidator of the Sardinia Islands. Andre noticed the flash of fear in the other party's eyes and quickly realized that the net weaver was probably a very high position, and the counselor should be referring to the legendary Lich. There was no doubt that the organization hidden behind the scenes was a behemoth, likely founded and controlled by several legendary mages. Perhaps it was used to provide information for themselves, or perhaps it was an old monster left behind by the magical civilization that was secretly plotting something. All in all, the secret behind it was definitely enough to scare the nobles to death. What he had come into contact with so far was only a small part of it. The balance mentioned in the conversation with the legendary Lich should be referring to using a part of the power of the Shadow Web to offset the power that Loretta Botones had secretly established. Of course, this support was definitely not unlimited. At most, the pirates of the Sardinia Islands would be under the control of a coup d'etat. In this way, the power between the two of them should slowly be balanced, and they could have an evenly matched battle. After understanding everything that the gold coin represented, Andre finally heaved a sigh of relief. He picked up the coin that was shining with golden light and carefully kept it close to his body. He then pointed to the corpse on the ground and said, "Clean this place up. Don't let anyone know what happened. My whereabouts need to be kept a secret for the time being. Also, your vice captain, Neil, is dead. He died under my sword." Ken did not hesitate to kneel on one knee and salute. "Understood. All of your requests will be fulfilled. As for Neil's death, it's better. He was originally a spy planted on the ship by the pirate king, Francis. He's not one of us at all. But did you find a tattered notebook on him?" "Tattered notebook?" Andre raised his eyebrows slightly and immediately took out the parchment book of poems. "You're talking about this?" "Yes, that's right. That's it." Ken obviously recognized this thing. He stood up excitedly and stared at the lame poem recorded on the parchment, full of greed and possessiveness. No matter how stupid Andre was at this moment, he understood that the content was definitely not as simple as a poem. There was a 90% chance that it was some kind of code or code. It definitely recorded something incredible, so he immediately asked, "Tell me, what is it?" It's the remnant manuscript of the famous swordsmanship master of the Malt Kingdom from more than 500 years ago, Sir Johnny Richardson. It's said that he created an unbelievably powerful swordsmanship back then. Even the fierce legendary Green Dragon, Milt's Poison Cloud, could not escape the fate of being beheaded. He was the greatest legendary warrior in modern human history, a weapon master, a dragon slayer, a giant killer. According to historical records alone, he had killed more than tens of thousands of creatures. His swordsmanship had reached the point of perfection. He could defeat an entire orc army by himself, and he wouldn't feel tired even if he fought for 3 days and 3 nights. He was a living legend, a swordsmanship master who stood at the peak of warriors, a monster who had grasped the pinnacle of killing techniques. Neil relied on deciphering a portion of the manuscript's contents to leap from a normal person to a 6th-rank wandering swordsman and comprehend his own battle techniques. If one were to disregard physical fitness and other factors, just in terms of swordsmanship alone, he was definitely the strongest person in Valen City. Even I, a 5th-rank warrior and 3rd-rank barbarian, would find it difficult to gain any advantage in a head-on battle. Kent replied with unusual excitement. His current mental state was as if his brain had received some kind of stimulation and entered an overly excited state. Large amounts of blood vessels even appeared on his eyes, and his breathing also became hurried. Master Swordsman, Johnny Richard Turner? Hearing this name, Andre couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise on his face. One had to know that as a mage who liked to read when he had nothing better to do, he had found many mentions of this swordsmanship master in many books, or more accurately, in historical records. He was hailed as the mentor of countless heroes and one of the strongest warriors that had ever appeared in the material world. Just the disciples he had taught alone had crossed the threshold of legend, and there were more than 10 who had also become famous figures. Among them, there was no lack of founding monarchs. Chapter 486. Clearly, as the manuscript that recorded his swordsmanship techniques, its value could not be measured by money. If the news were to spread, all the warriors of the Oleo continent would gather here within a month at most, fighting over Johannes Richard Turner's swordsmanship manuscript. There might even be a large-scale battle. Perhaps the word priceless was the best way to describe this tattered collection of poems. But what puzzled Andre was, where did Neil get this manuscript? And how did he decipher the password? As a typical conspiracy theorist, he didn't think that something so precious could be obtained so easily, not to mention the fact that the real content was covered up with lame poems. Without the help of magic, it would take decades for a normal person to decipher the secrets. Thinking of this, he pointed at the notebook in his hand and said, "Tell me everything about it. Try to be as detailed as possible." Kent resisted the urge to rush forward and grab the manuscript. He took a deep breath, suppressed his restless emotions, and explained in a low voice, "Sir, I'm afraid this story started more than 10 years ago. I heard it from another person by chance. Whether it's true or not, I can't be sure, so please don't take it too seriously. Because it does sound a little preposterous, even I don't really believe it. It's just that Neil's swordsmanship is a little too powerful, and it seriously doesn't match his profession level. Since I can't find any other reason, I can only take it as true for now. It doesn't matter. Just tell me what you know, and I'll judge whether it's true or not. Do you think that as a foot, you're smarter than me as a web weaver?" Andre narrowed his eyes, and his tone suddenly became stern. At the same time, he used the mithril scimitar in his hand to lift Kent's chin, releasing a faint murderous aura from his body. Kent felt a cold touch on his skin, and a row of sweat appeared on his forehead. He quickly waved his hand. "No, please don't misunderstand. You're a noble web weaver. How dare I have such blasphemous thoughts?" As a high-ranking leader of the Shadow Web, he knew how big the difference between a foot and a web weaver was. It could even be described as a moat. The former was just a person in charge of a certain area or a special project, while the latter was a trusted aide of the highest counselor. They often controlled a huge intelligence network, and as the name suggested, they hid in the dark to weave a large net of conspiracies. They had the right to kill the lower-ranking members, and could even cause a rebellion to topple a country. In fact, the Shadow Web had secretly controlled many important members of the kingdoms and cities. However, in order to avoid alerting the gods, they had always been in a state of concealment. Only when the higher-ups gave the order to act would these conspiracies slowly surface. It looked like a conflict that had accumulated to a certain extent and suddenly erupted. Although Andre looked very young, Kent didn't dare to judge him by his appearance. He knew that there were many ways in the world to change or hide one's age, body shape, appearance, gender, and so on. The handsome young man in front of him might be from a special race that was older than his grandfather's grandfather. Similar situations were not uncommon in the Shadow Web. "Is that so?" Andre smiled non-committally as he sheathed his saber back into its scabbard. Soon, he put on a harmless smile and said, "Very well. Let's talk about the origin of this manuscript. Don't hide anything from me. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't use other means. Do you understand?" "Understood." Kent nodded quickly. He was already a little scared by Brendel's temperamental behavior. He didn't even dare to say a word. Seeing that his goal was achieved, Andre didn't continue to intimidate him. He stood there quietly and pretended to listen attentively. The reason why he did this was because he was afraid that his understanding of the shadow web was too little and he might accidentally reveal a flaw. However, if the other party felt a strong sense of fear, then they would subconsciously turn their attention to him, afraid that they would say or do something wrong. This would lead to many omissions in many details. This was a little trick in psychology. Many superiors like to use this trick to establish a strong and invincible image in front of their subordinates, making it easier to manage. However, Kent obviously didn't know this. He was completely immersed in a state of caution and couldn't extricate himself. Just when he was about to start talking about the origin of the manuscript, Fiona, who was hiding behind the shelf, accidentally knocked over a wooden barrel and made a loud bang. Who is there? Kent immediately stood up and stared at the place where the sound came from. The first principle that all members of the Shadow Web had to abide by was confidentiality. Except for the designated superiors and subordinates, no one was allowed to leak information to others. Otherwise, they had to personally deal with the hidden danger, even if it was the person closest to them. Otherwise, the cleaners would start to take action. It's me. Fiona bit her lower lip and slowly walked out from behind the shelf. She had a nervous expression on her face, and both of her hands were tightly holding the bronze flintlock. She heard the conversation clearly. She knew that if an outsider was eavesdropping in this kind of secret organization, they would most likely be silenced. So she was in a state of extreme fear. After discovering that it was an unfamiliar girl, Kent secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Without saying a word, he immediately pulled out his weapon and wanted to silence her. However, Andre pulled him back and shook his head gently. Put down the weapon. She's my person. She won't leak the content of the conversation just now. There's no need to be so nervous. Your person? Kent was stunned. He raised his head and looked at the girl's dress and temperament. His heart was full of doubts. In his opinion, Fiona was an ordinary girl who had never seen the world. Although she was a little beautiful, she didn't look like a woman who could be the assistant of the Shadow Web Weaver. That's right, my person. Don't look down on her. In fact, she's a priest of the Fire Elemental Prince, Asir Desir. She has great potential and value. Andre pretended to be mysterious and explained. Oh, the powerful Fire Elemental Lord who is known as the Lord of Raging Flames? Kent obviously knew something about it, for he called out the name of Aesop Desir at once. Chapter 487. Andre nodded with a smile. That's right. She's a priestess of the Flame of Wrath. She might be the only priestess in the material world, so you'd better not have any ideas about her. Understood. Don't worry, I'll keep this a secret. I won't let anyone else know. I believe that with this outstanding achievement, you'll definitely be rewarded by the councilman. Kent sheathed his weapon without any hesitation and revealed a knowing look. No one knew what he thought of, but a lewd smile appeared on his expressionless face. As the saying went, people who had been involved in conspiracies and plots for a long time always liked to complicate simple things. As long as you gave them a piece of information, they would quickly come up with a series of complicated conjectures. More than 99% of the conjectures would be unimaginable. There was no doubt that Ken had fallen into a similar cycle. His mind automatically filled in the gaps and saved him the trouble of making up lies. Andre's mouth flashed with a hint of playfulness, and he quickly urged, "All right, this matter ends here. Tell me about the origins of the manuscript. I can't wait to hear the details." "As you wish." Ken placed one hand on his chest and bowed elegantly. According to the information I received, Neil Grant was just an ordinary hereditary butler 15 years ago. He didn't undergo any professional training and worked for the Magi family in Mizero City. He lived a busy and fulfilling life every day. However, fate played a little joke on him when the year was about to end. A man who claimed to be from the kingdom of Malt suddenly collapsed in front of the manor of the Magi family. When the servants found him, he was already dead. Out of respect for the deceased, the eldest son of the family, Piero, ordered the servants to change the corpse into clean clothes and prepare for a simple funeral. While doing so, Neil found a book of poetry in the corpse's undergarments. It's the one you're holding now. However, no one realized its value at the time. It was just a passerby's work and was casually thrown on the bookshelf. No one cared about it since then. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. Everyone thought that the incident was over and that it was time to prepare for the new year. However, on the last day of December, the grave of the dead man was suddenly dug up by someone. Not only were the funerary objects inside missing, even the corpse had disappeared without a trace. The people in the manor were scared out of their wits. They all suspected that a necromancer was stealing the corpses. Even Neil, who had always been calm, had a bad feeling about it. As a matter of fact, his intuition was right. Just after midnight, an unknown person or monster suddenly attacked the manor and killed every living thing. They even asked around for a book of poetry that was bound with old parchment. There's only one wound on the body of the deceased body, and that was his left eye. At this point, Kent couldn't help but shiver. His eyes were filled with unconcealable fear, as if he was recalling the scene back then. After all, the manor of a noble was usually surrounded by tall walls, almost like a castle. There were also at least 30 elite soldiers, 2 to 3 feudal knights, a dozen ferocious hunting dogs, and at least 30 servants. The presence of the dogs meant that there was no way to ambush them. The presence of the knights meant that there was no lack of high-end combat power. With over 30 soldiers and a considerable number of servants, even if they encountered a strong enemy, they should be able to escape, right? However, it was under such circumstances that everyone had died from a sword piercing through their eyes. Moreover, all of them had died in the left eye. Even the dogs were no exception. Just how powerful would one have to be able to do something like this? Even though he couldn't confirm the authenticity of the rumors, Kent still felt his entire body turn cold every time he thought of the rumors. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over his head. Apart from fear, there was no other emotion in his heart. At the very least, it has to be a melee fighter above level 17. Who knows? He might have even crossed the threshold of the legendary realm and mastered some special killing techniques. Andre furrowed his brows, secretly estimating the strength of the killer. At the same time, he estimated the chances of him surviving if he encountered the killer. Although mages had a huge advantage when facing melee fighters, once their total profession level exceeded 21, it meant that they could obtain certain things that were beyond the limits of their profession. For example, armored skin, which could make a warrior's skin as hard as leather armor. Ordinary iron weapons could only leave a white mark on the warrior's skin, and not even a drop of blood could be seen. Another example was legendary evasion, which could evolve the body's reflexes to a level beyond that of felines. Even standing in a rain of arrows, the warrior could easily dodge them all. There were even some warriors who could temporarily break through the sound barrier and create terrifying supersonic attacks. Often, they could smash an elephant into meat paste. The power was unbelievably strong. Of course, the physical requirements of warriors also determined that their numbers were inevitably few, even fewer than that of the legendary mages. This was because the latter had various methods to prolong their lives, while the former's physical fitness would begin to decline rapidly once they reached middle age. No matter how powerful a legendary warrior was, if it didn't have a fortuitous encounter, he could only end up as a powerless old man. A scholar in Orier once said that warriors were pitiful. When they were young, they couldn't cross the threshold of the legendary realm due to their lack of experience. However, when they accumulated enough experience, they would have become white-haired old men. Their physical fitness would decline greatly, and they would completely lose the chance to advance to the legendary realm. Only those races with long lives and very few geniuses among geniuses had the ability to advance to the highest level. In comparison, it was much easier for mages to cross the threshold of the legendary realm. At least there were many methods in arcane magic to increase one's lifespan. Moreover, the speed of aging of the mind was much slower than that of the muscles, not to mention the ritual to transform into an undead creature or an elemental life. With a long lifespan, Mages could naturally slowly accumulate knowledge, skills, and experience. Finally, they could transform quantitative change into qualitative change, cross the threshold of the legendary realm, and form their own unique magical domain. Of course, for most mages, they might not be able to reach such heights in their lifetime. Generally speaking, everyone would be stuck at a certain stage according to their talent and experience. If there were no special opportunities, it would be difficult to take another step forward. Chapter 488. Generally speaking, it was easy to become a warrior. Any ordinary person could become a warrior after strict training, but it was difficult to develop to a higher level of power. On the other hand, it was the opposite for a mage. It was difficult to become a mage. One had to be smart enough and have strong learning and logical thinking ability, and it required a lot of talent. However, as long as one focused and explored step by step, it was not a problem to reach level 7. There is no doubt that a level 7 mage could be considered as a high-level combat force in most places. Regardless of whether it was AoE damage, self-defense, or large-scale control, they could handle it with ease. Coupled with magical items, scrolls, and potions, just a few of them would be able to change the direction of a battle. Most importantly, a level 7 mage could already use certain means, such as making a deal or offering a sacrifice to a powerful creature from another plane, or concocting a life-prolonging potion according to a formula, to forcibly delay the arrival of death. It was undoubtedly 100 times more powerful than a warrior's less than 10 years of glory. Even if a mage was too old to walk, as long as his fingers could still bend and his throat could still make sounds, he could still cast spells in theory. As for legendary mages, unless they were tired of living and took the initiative to provoke the terrifying monsters hidden in the multiverse, even the gods could not do anything to them. It was almost equivalent to eternal life. Since it was not so easy to die, it meant that every time a legendary mage was born in the world, the total number of legendary mages would increase by 1, and basically, it would not decrease. Once a legendary warrior reached a certain age, either their body would be seriously aged and they would break away from the legendary level, or they would die in a fierce battle. Therefore, although there were many legendary warriors recorded in history, there were very few who could survive. At present, there were less than 6 legendary melee professions in the whole of Orire. They were the heroes of all the barbarian tribes in the great wilderness of Charlotte, the great legendary barbarian warrior, Shifts. In the overseas elves' gathering place, the most powerful legendary sword dancer among the moon elves, Antinoa. The legendary head knight of the northern Canteru kingdom, Ulrich Gerald. The chosen of the god of war in the material world, the weapon master who was known as the strongest warrior on the continent, Kelvin Baliman. In the Death Swamp, the king of hundreds of thousands of lizardmen tribes, the legendary ranger, Balthazar. The last one was a legendary paladin who served the god of justice, Charlene Lancel. Each of these people had terrifying power. Take the weapons master Kelvin Baraman as an example. Without the interference of powerful spellcasters, he could single-handedly kill tens of thousands of professional armies. It was said that with the legendary battle axe Dragon Roar, a full-force blow could tear the earth apart, and he could tear down a castle with his bare hands. However, even such a terrifying humanoid weapon wouldn't dare to claim that it could reach the level of Master Swordsman Jonas Richard Turner at his peak. From this, it could be seen how valuable the manuscripts he left behind were. It wasn't surprising that it attracted the attention of some experts. André could almost imagine that there were countless forces involved in this matter. The annihilation of the McGee family was completely expected. If it were any other person or organization that wanted to monopolize the secret, they would not have allowed anyone who had touched the manuscript to live. After all, it would be better if fewer people knew about something as important as this. Killing people happened to be the simplest and most brutal way to hide the truth. Thinking of this, Roland nodded thoughtfully and continued to ask, what happened after that? How did Neil escape the pursuit and become a wandering swordsman and pirate with this manuscript? A helpless expression appeared on Kent's face as he replied with a wry smile. Perhaps you feel that the first part of the story is bizarre enough, but the second part of the story is even more unbelievable. Just a few hours before the incident, Neil received an anonymous letter asking him to take the manuscript to the river 3 kilometers away from the manor. This guy was lucky enough to escape the massacre and met a man who claimed to be the successor of Jonas Richard Turner. This man directly told Neil that great danger had arrived and asked him to take the manuscript and leave Mizero City as quickly as possible. He wanted him to hide in a place where no one could find him. It would be best if he never let the manuscript see the light of day again. After these words, a powerful assassin suddenly appeared and engaged in an earth-shattering battle with the successor of Jonas Richard Turner. No one knew who won in the end, but from the traces left on the ground, there was indeed a fierce battle between two powerful warriors. Neil took this opportunity to escape to the docks with the manuscript and took a boat to Valen City in the Sardinia Islands. He used the chaotic situation here to hide himself and found a codebreaker expert to translate some of the swordsmanship techniques. It didn't take long for him to transform from an ordinary person to a wandering swordsman. In order to ensure that the secret wouldn't be known by a second person, he quickly killed the codebreaker expert after he obtained part of the secret. From then on, no one else knew about the secret of the manuscript. After many investigations, I finally found the daughter of the codebreaker expert. Coupled with the huge intelligence system of the shadow web, I was able to find some clues. That sounds interesting. He's a pursuer, and he's the successor of Jonas Richard Turner. It's like a classic story from the bards. Andre clearly didn't believe Kent's story. In his opinion, there were too many melodramatic coincidences. Most importantly, Neil was already in his 50s. Even a decade ago, he was between 35 and 40 years old. He had long since passed the prime of his body. So how could he have trained to be so agile? It had to be known that once a human reached the age of 30, their muscles would begin to loosen and their bones would basically take shape. Perhaps they could increase their strength and endurance through training, but it was absolutely impossible for them to improve their agility. It was like many acrobats were performed by children, because children had the softest bones and could do many unimaginable movements. There was no doubt that Neil's swordsmanship was extremely agile, especially his footwork and the range of his wrist movements. He had to train from a young age, or he would never be able to reach the speed he displayed in battle. Chapter 489. Kent nodded in agreement. You're right. That's what I was thinking as well. That's why I've been hesitating on whether or not I should tell you this. After all, there are too many loopholes that can be found in it, and it can't stand up to scrutiny. The only thing that can be confirmed is that Neil truly values that manuscript very much. So much so that he carries it with him no matter if it's eating, sleeping, or relieving himself. Andre glanced at the worn-out parchment in his hand and asked noncommittally with a smile, "Since you desire this manuscript so much, then you must have a way to decipher the secrets within." "Of course. I've already contacted the daughter of the codebreaker expert. She claims that she can crack the code on it." Kent replied without even thinking. Although he wanted to monopolize the secrets hidden in the manuscript, he immediately dismissed the idea after considering the way the shadow web dealt with traitors. He only hoped that the moody web weaver in front of him would share some of the results of the hard work he had put in to collect the information. "Give me her name and address. If this manuscript is real, then I don't mind bestowing a portion of it to you as a reward." A trace of playfulness surfaced on Andre's face as he spoke. As a transmigrator who could see through human nature, he could see the desire and greed in the other party's eyes at a glance. Therefore, he immediately made a promise, because in his next plan, he still needed to use the shadow web's feet. "Thank you very much for your grace. Here is her name and address. She's on a worn-out cargo ship in the lower city of Valen City. When the time comes, you just have to say the code phrase, 'one who walks on water,' and someone will naturally come to your aid." Kent handed over a slip of paper with her name and address written on it with both hands. Andre put away the slip of paper and nodded in satisfaction. "Very good. Now go do what you need to do." I'm going to hide at the bottom of the ship for a while. You should return to Valen City as soon as possible and gather all the people in the organization in this area. There's going to be a big move soon." With that, he pulled Fiona's hand and quickly walked down the dim stairs, disappearing at the end not long after. "A big move, huh? Heh. Looks like after so many years, it's finally time for me to reap the rewards. Staying in the dark and playing tricks all day long. How could it compare to holding great power and becoming an overlord? Maybe after the subversion plan succeeds, my level will also increase, and I might even become the pirate king on the surface of the Sardinia Islands. Just thinking about it makes me excited." Kent looked at the corpse on the ground and growled excitedly. His eyes emitted a chilling light, and in a short while, he sank the corpse into the sea from the side of the cabin. At the same time, he used the seawater to wash away the blood. Throughout the whole process, he did not show any sadness or regret, as if the one who died was a stranger and not his right-hand man. Perhaps in his heart, the 200-plus pirates on the Sea Wolf were just pawns that could be used. Even if all of them died, he wouldn't feel sad or sad. A scholar once said, "If a person has no ambition, he will not be enterprising. Most of his personality will be cowardly. At the same time, he will not have a strong sense of responsibility. He will be muddle-headed for the rest of his life. Until the day he dies, he will probably not find the meaning of his existence." Even though this might be too absolute, it was more or less reasonable. It was obvious that Kent was such an ambitious person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have joined a secret organization like the Shadow Net. It was all for the sake of one day standing out and becoming one of those high-ranking members who held great power in their hands. Of course, the price he paid for this wasn't small. Not only did he give up his status as a small noble and his inheritance rights, he had also concealed his identity for so many years. Now that he finally had the chance to show off his skills, he naturally had to give it his all. In just over half an hour, the pirates on the shore were recalled. Following closely behind, the Sea Wolf set sail through the night, disregarding the danger of hitting the rocks, and headed in the direction of Valen City. This ambitious foot was already impatient to start his operation and try his best to leave a good impression in front of Andre so that he could smoothly occupy an advantageous position in the coming days. Only then would he be able to obtain more power. After all, he wasn't the only foot in the entire Sardinia Islands. There were 7 other fellows of the same level actively on the move. Once they took the initiative, the days after would be difficult. Using the cover of the night, the Sea Wolf quickly left Sea Turtle Island and headed for the waters filled with undercurrents and reefs. They would probably be able to dock near the harbor by midnight. The pirates would also be able to find a tavern or brothel on shore to vent their anger and dissatisfaction. Even though they had some doubts about the captain's sudden order to stop the search, none of them dared to ask about it due to Sea Wolf Kent's cold and tyrannical personality. Andre knew that he was already on the way to Valen City, as he felt the bumps caused by the waves crashing against the hull. He slightly relaxed his tense nerves and raised his head to look at the silent girl sitting in front of him, smiling faintly. "I know that you must have a lot of questions, confusion, and even fear right now. It doesn't matter. You can ask me anything now. As long as it doesn't involve any sensitive topics, I will definitely give you an answer. After all, there are still a few hours before we reach our destination, so there's enough time." It had to be said that tonight's events had happened too quickly and too suddenly. First, he had experienced a dangerous battle, followed by the emergence of the Shadow Web, and finally involved the manuscript of a master swordsman. Even he himself felt that it was unreal, let alone a girl from a fisherman's family who had lived in a relatively isolated area since she was young. Of course, Fiona was no longer an ordinary girl. She was the fire elemental prince, a priest of Aesop Desir. Furthermore, she had been baptized in blood, so she didn't panic like an ordinary girl, nor did she scream loudly. She only responded with silence. However, there were some things that had to be dealt with. Otherwise, once a knot was left in her heart, it would be difficult to smooth it over. Perhaps because she saw the sincerity in Andre's eyes, Fiona hesitated for a moment before immediately asking, "What kind of organization is the Shadow Web? What's your goal in joining them?" One had to know that there were countless evil cults and secret meetings in Orire. Some were unscrupulous in fighting for benefits, while others incited rebellions and incited conflicts between nobles in order to gain control of a certain area. In short, there were few good people who liked to operate in the shadows. Chapter 490. Although Fiona did not reject killing and destruction as a priestess of the Lord of Raging Flames, it did not mean that she liked to hang out with a group of insidious and cunning guys all day long. Haha, I knew you would ask these two questions. Andre shook his head helplessly. He took out the gold coin with the special pattern and waved it. Do you see this? It was an accidental reward after an adventure. The person who gave it to me said that this thing could bring me good luck. I didn't think much at the time and accepted it directly. But who would have thought that the so-called good luck referred to the resources that could be used by the Shadow Web? In fact, I'm the same as you. I only found out today that there was a secret society hidden in the dark on the Sardinia Islands. Otherwise, why would there be such a fierce battle and almost lose my life? As for my goal, it's very simple. I want to use their power to completely destroy the rule of the pirate King Francis and return this distorted archipelago to normal. You mean all of this is just a coincidence? Fiona had an incredulous expression on her face. She did not seem to believe this explanation. No, it's the opposite. Everything you see and hear is a trap set up by someone in advance, and I'm just a manipulated chess piece. Can you understand this explanation? Since there was no way to tell the truth, Andre had to use another way to explain the current situation. He only hoped that the girl in front of him could understand that he was not a member of a mysterious organization, let alone an ambitious person who liked to overthrow the regime. What he yearned for most was to hide in a well-equipped mage tower and quietly study all kinds of strange mathematical olympiads, strange magical creatures, and endless planes that existed in the distant universe. But unfortunately, the simpler the wish, the harder it was to realize it. After all, there were only so many social resources. If one wanted to get enough resources, others would get less. If one wanted to get enough resources, one had to join the struggle between people and get rid of some of the vested interests and replace them. I seem to understand a little. So, you're not a member of the Shadow Web, and you're just using them, right? Fiona's face looked a little better, and the wariness in her eyes was also reduced a lot. But with her intellect, it was obvious that she couldn't understand the intricate relationships, not to mention the conspiracy behind it. It just so happened that Andre didn't want this young lady to come into contact with the dark side for the time being. So, he nodded with a smile. More or less. Actually, you just have to treat them as mercenaries who only care about profits, and I'm equivalent to an employer who doesn't intend to pay. Once you've achieved your goal, you can kick them away. Think about it. Under the rule of the pirates, the entire Sardinia archipelago was in a state of disorder and chaos, especially Valen City, which hides a large amount of evil. Wouldn't it be good if we could find an opportunity to overthrow everything and rebuild a new order so that the residents here could live normal lives? It's good, but can it really succeed? The pirates have ruled this archipelago for more than 400 years. Even when faced with a huge fleet led by Lincoln City, they have never been destroyed. Are you sure you have a way to do this? Fiona asked, holding her chin. Of course, the Pirate Alliance isn't as powerful as you think. They are like castles made of ice. They might look very sturdy on the surface and can withstand the test of powerful enemies, but once the temperature rises, they will quickly melt. What I want to do this time is to disintegrate them from the inside. I want all the pirates to be suspicious of each other, fight each other, and have internal strife, destroying the weak trust and balance between them. Then, I will attack Valen City with a thunderous attack and completely end the history of the pirates on this archipelago. I believe you don't want to see your home continue to be ravaged by pirates who only know how to plunder and destroy, right? Just like the saying goes, humans are creatures who are extremely greedy and can never satisfy their desires. Andre had just escaped danger and was already planning to take down the Sardinia archipelago and turn it into a force under his control, so that he could seize the initiative in the upcoming game. After all, the Lich's intention in giving him that gold coin was very likely to be to take down these fierce pirates as support. If he didn't make good use of it, how could he be worthy of himself? Fiona bit her lips with a complicated expression and retorted in a low voice, "No, this isn't my home. This is the cage that imprisoned me and my brother. But I would be very happy to see the pirates' rule in the Sardinia archipelago end. It would be best if scum like them were all killed. Don't worry, I promise that after everything is over, there won't be a single pirate left alive here. They were born in the sea, so they should naturally die in the sea." At this point, the corner of Andre's mouth rose slightly, a cold smile that made one shudder. He wouldn't keep a group of unruly pirates who always wanted to replace him. Thus, he planned to use them as cannon fodder when the time was right and send them out to fight the enemy head-on. If they all died, then so be it. He could just push them back and rebuild them. As for the members of the Shadow Net, he also had to find an excuse to send them away. Otherwise, they would be scared awake even in their sleep when they thought of such a mysterious organization hidden in the dark in their own territory. Good. Then I'll wait to see the end of all the pirates. In addition, I'll keep what happened today a secret for you and won't mention it to anyone. Perhaps she caught the killing intent that flashed in Andre's eyes. Fiona also gave a solemn guarantee. Because of the hatred, she wanted to see the pirates suffer more than anyone else. After a conversation, the two who were originally a little estranged got back on good terms, especially the girl who had been conflicted. She could finally put down the worries in her heart and didn't have to force herself to treat the person she liked like an enemy. Andre also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't want to fall out with his savior and become enemies, and he didn't want the first priest that he had painstakingly created to be gone just like that. Through this incident, he suddenly realized that the so-called identity of the chosen one of Aesop's Desir was not omnipotent. At least, after the girl in front of him became a priest, she still retained her original personality and way of thinking. Once his behavior and ideas conflicted with hers, the result was likely to be a parting of ways, or even an enemy. Although the Oleal continent was a magical world full of supernatural powers, the people who lived here were no different from the people on Earth. They all had a complete outlook on life and values. They were not puppets, nor were they puppets that could be manipulated by others. If they neglected this point, sooner or later, they would suffer a huge setback. Chapter 491. A few hours later, the Sea Wolf finally passed through the reef area without any mishap and slowly sailed into the bustling docks of Valen City. Even though it was already midnight, the entire city still seemed to be bustling with activity. The noise could be heard clearly from thousands of meters away. From a certain point of view, the night was the true state of this place, especially the ubiquitous robberies, murders, as well as the fierce conflicts over territory. Finally, there were drunkards and scantily clad prostitutes, forming a hellish scene. Perhaps only the demon's home, the bottomless abyss, would be able to see such a scene. However, the pirates clearly didn't care about this. With the captain's order, they immediately rushed to the nearest tavern and brothel, all of them running away in the blink of an eye. After watching the last crew member leave, Kent quickly came to the bottom of the cabin and lightly knocked on the door. "Esteemed Lord Net Weaver, we have reached the shore. You and your maid can come out now." Just as he finished speaking, the tightly shut cabin door slowly opened. Andre, who had been waiting for a long time, stepped over the threshold and arrived at the dim corridor. He looked around the empty cabin and immediately asked, "Have you sent away all the pirates under your command?" "Yes, they've all gone to the nearby taverns to have some fun. There's no fourth person on this ship apart from us. If you have any instructions, please feel free to tell me. I'll do my best to complete it." Kent placed a hand on his chest and bowed deeply. "I will give you half a month to gather all the senior members of the organization in this area. Tell them that the incubation period has ended. The next thing to do is to overthrow the rule of the pirate King Francis and take control of the entire Sardinia Islands. Remember, try to be discreet when communicating. I don't want the enemy to be aware of it beforehand. Do you understand?" Andre stared at Kent and spoke of his plan in a low voice. Of course, this wasn't everything. Just like what he had done before, he had at least 2 backup plans for everything. On one hand, he would use the resources of a shadow web to cause maximum damage. On the other hand, he would contact Lincoln City as soon as possible and transfer a few of his trusted aides to important positions so that he could quickly take control of the situation after the operation was successful. He would strive to completely turn them into his support before the hot summer ended. The most important thing was that this matter must not be known to Loretta Botons. The news had to be sealed for at least half a year. Otherwise, the sneak attack would lose its effect. Pirate King Francis and Loretta were allies. Andre was looking forward to seeing Loretta's expression when he found out that his close ally had stabbed him in the back. He believed that it would be very interesting. Hearing this, Kent's eyes instantly lit up. At the same time, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of pearly white teeth, and nodded vigorously. Understood. Don't worry, I'll be able to gather the other 7 legs in half a month at most. It just so happens that the Pirate King is gathering all the captains to return. It's said that he's going to make a big move. We can take this opportunity to test how many people are dissatisfied with Francis. If possible, it's best to incite a portion of the ambitious captains to start a riot. We'll launch a fatal blow when both sides are injured. Don't worry, this matter will take at least a month and a half to brew. If we want to control the entire Sardinia, it's not enough to just get rid of the Pirate King. We also have to find a way to eradicate the underground guild controlling Valence City. Otherwise, we'll never be able to obtain true power. In addition, I estimate that the large-scale gathering of the pirate captains is likely to interfere with the trade war between Lincoln City and Baccarat City. You'd better be mentally prepared. The battle will be very fierce. After all, Lincoln City has the strongest naval fleet in the South. Even if they join forces with Baccarat City to attack from both sides, they'll lose more than half or even 2/3 of their forces. Tell our people to be careful and not become cannon fodder for no reason. Although Andre hoped that the people of ShadowNet would all die, now was not the time, so he took the initiative to remind them. It was almost June now, and the trade war had been going on for more than 2 months. Both Lincoln City and Baccarat City had done their best, attacking and plundering each other on the vast sea in an attempt to force the other party to surrender and sign a series of unequal treaties. However, due to the disruption of the Eye of Arcane, Baccarat City's losses seemed to be greater. Coupled with the fact that they were weaker to begin with, Loretta Botons would not have the chance to annihilate them if they did not launch a war of annihilation. With his intelligence, he would definitely not watch his plan fail. Thus, the large-scale gathering of the pirates this time was bound to launch an attack from behind and completely destroy the navy that Lincoln City was so proud of in a predetermined sea area. Although Andre still did not understand why the other party wanted to mess up Lincoln City and why they wanted to summon a demigod-level demon lord in the material world, for his own interests and the safety of his subordinates and friends, he had to win this game no matter what. Please rest assured, we've already collected most of the information in this regard. There will definitely be no mistakes, Kent said confidently. As a veteran spy of ShadowNet, if he could not even understand such an obvious situation, he would have died countless times. Remember, once you find anything wrong, send someone to pass the news to me as soon as possible. Okay, I still have something to do. That's all for today. We'll talk about the rest when you gather the other 7 legs. After saying this, Andre pulled his cloak, put on his hood, and quickly walked up the stairs leading to the upper floor. Fiona followed closely behind, and it did not take long for them to disappear at the end of the dim street. Looking at the gradually disappearing figures of the two, an excited smile quickly appeared on Kent's face. He took out a gold coin with a special pattern and gently stroked it a few times. After a few seconds, the gold coin began to get hotter and hotter, and finally completely melted in a liquid and fell to the ground, forming a circular flat surface. He quickly squatted down and whispered an incantation. After a while, a woman's face appeared on the flat surface. Damn it! Didn't the organization prohibit our legs from contacting each other? You'd better have a reasonable explanation. Otherwise, don't blame me for falling out with you." The woman's mood was obviously not very good. As soon as she appeared, she cursed loudly and did not give the other party any face. Chapter 492. However, Kent didn't fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, he extended a finger and shook it with a smile. "No, no, no. Dear Grace Omer, don't be so agitated. Since I dare to contact you, I must have a good reason. Moreover, it's good news. Why can't you calm down and let me finish?" The bald woman was slightly surprised and quickly asked, "Good news? What good news? Could it be that there's finally a new order from above?" Kent laughed and replied, "Ha ha ha ha. It's 10,000 times better than that. A respected net weaver has appeared, and he brought a new order. That is to overthrow and seize control of the Sardinia Islands. Our many years of hard work in hiding and infiltrating is finally coming to an end. Get ready. A new era of great waves in these seas is about to begin. Also, don't forget to inform the next person. Please be sure to pass this news on to everyone as soon as possible." Net weaver, are you sure you're not mistaken? How could a respected net weaver come to such a remote place? The woman called Grace Omer opened her mouth wide in shock, revealing an expression of disbelief. She didn't come back to her senses for a long time. "Of course I'm not mistaken. You should know best how special the gold coin that symbolizes the identity of the net weaver is. Once the net weaver is killed or his mind is controlled, then it will immediately lose its luster. I've already confirmed repeatedly that it is indeed a net weaver gold coin, even if the person carrying it looks a little too young." Kent smiled and spread out his hands as he spoke. After receiving an affirmative answer, Grace Omer narrowed her eyes and nodded thoughtfully. "Since that's the case, does that mean our luck has come?" "Yes, our luck has come. Remember, move quickly. Don't make any mistakes at this critical moment. Otherwise, even if I let you go, the net weaver won't let you go. I believe you haven't forgotten how the organization deals with failures and traitors, right?" At the end of the conversation, Kent used a slightly threatening tone. For an ambitious person like him, he would never allow anyone to obstruct him from obtaining greater power. Otherwise, even his own flesh and blood would not be able to escape death. "Oof, I don't need you to remind me of this. Goodbye." Grace knew Kent's character well. She sneered and cut off the communication, not giving him a chance to continue teaching her a lesson. He, as expected of the pirate queen, Grace Omer. She actually dares to ignore my existence. But don't worry, there's still plenty of time for you to kneel down and lick my toes. Kent muttered to himself with a sinister expression. Valen City was especially restless at night. Not long after they'd left the relatively safe harbor area, a few men with wooden sticks in their hands started tailing them from not too far behind. It was obvious what they were up to. Apart from that, there were also a few children in tattered pants following them from afar. Their eyes emitted a green glow that sent chills down one's spine. In particular, each of them was holding a piece of metal that was stained with blood. Even a transmigrator like Andre, who had a strong mental fortitude, could not help but feel his scalp go numb. The reason was simple. He could tell at a glance that these children were cannibals through and through. In other words, they weren't following them to rob them. Instead, they were waiting for the bandits to kill them and then pounce on them to eat. Andre simply couldn't imagine how harsh the living conditions were to create these little fellows who relied on cannibalism to survive. No wonder those of the good faction would all show expressions of extreme disgust when the Sardinia was mentioned. So the legends of cannibalistic pirates were all true. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart when he thought of what these children who grew up eating human flesh would look like when they grew up. At the same time, he strengthened his resolve to destroy everything in front of him. It was obviously Fiona's first time in Valen City. She looked especially nervous as she tightly gripped the small hammer she'd taken from the blacksmith shop with one hand and her gun with the other. She would pull the trigger without hesitation if the other party came within 10 meters of her. Seeing the girl's body and movements become more and more stiff, Andre sighed helplessly and immediately patted her shoulder. He lowered his voice and comforted her. "Don't be nervous. They're only normal people. They don't even have a decent weapon and are no threat to us. But the gazes of those people are a bit scary, especially those children. They're like wild beasts staring at their prey." Fiona shrunk her neck back with some fear. Even if she didn't know that the children were cannibals, her 14 points of perceptive sense allowed her to sense the malicious intent behind their actions. After all, the other party had never tried to hide their naked desires. It wasn't greed for wealth, nor was it infatuation for beauty. It was the most primitive, most basic human need, appetite. Yeah, this damned world. All right, we'll get rid of all the tails here. Remember, you must be quick and don't be soft. Especially those children. Don't leave a single one alive. Andre stopped in his tracks as he spoke and slowly drew out the two thin swords at his waist, preparing for battle. Before he transmigrated, he had read a book that described several famous ogres on Earth in detail. The book also analyzed their motivations and personalities. In the end, it concluded that the acidic substances in human flesh were different from those of other animals. They were highly addictive. This also meant that once an animal tasted human flesh, it would immediately lose interest in other kinds of meat. The so-called man-eating lions and man-eating tigers came from this. But compared to these beasts that relied on instinct to drive them, the ones that ate their own kind were the most dangerous and the most terrifying monsters. After confirming that those children were cannibals, Andre felt extremely uncomfortable, as if there was something stuck in his chest and he couldn't breathe. Although after coming to this world, he had gradually begun to get used to the strict hierarchical system and the poor people at the bottom. But every time he saw those underage children struggling on the verge of death, his heart would still be strongly touched. However, although he was touched, he did not have the slightest intention of showing mercy. He even had the impulse to kill all those children whose eyes were shining with green light, especially those faces that should have been pure and innocent. They were filled with undisguised bestiality. It was simply unbearable. Chapter 493. Because Andre knew very well that these children who survived on human flesh had been infected with a strong cannibalism, and they would never be able to quit in the future. Instead of letting them grow up to become real demons, it was better to eliminate them now to avoid more victims in the future. Thinking of this, he took a deep breath and shouted at the shadows hiding in the alley behind him, "Come out. I see you guys." As soon as his voice fell, a few shirtless men holding sticks or daggers came out from the surrounding corners. Their eyes were fierce, and they quickly blocked the front and back of the alley. The leader of the group glanced at Fiona with lustful eyes, grinned and threatened. "Ha, boy, if you know what's good for you, then obediently take out all the valuable things on you, and then leave that beautiful girl behind. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. Do you see those little bastards behind us? If you dare to resist, I'll let them cut off your flesh piece by piece and eat it." You deliberately instigated them to eat people? Andre's face instantly became gloomy. Something called anger quickly filled his brain, and even his hands began to tremble slightly. There was no doubt that only when his anger was about to break through his reason, he would be so agitated. Instigated? Ha ha! The middle-aged man suddenly laughed and showed a very proud expression. "No, this is not instigation, but I'll let them learn how to get cheap food. Think about it. There are countless unlucky people dying in this city every day, and their bodies are just thrown into the sea to feed the fish. Don't you think this is a great waste?" However, this guy obviously did not notice that Andre's eyes hidden under the hood were bloodshot at the moment. At the moment when the last word fell, he immediately exerted force on his feet, and his whole body was like an arrow leaving the bow. In the blink of an eye, he rushed forward, and one of the thin swords went straight through his eyes and into his brain. Fast, unbelievably fast. With his terrifying body coordination and the exquisite control of the wandering swordsman, Andre killed the enemy's leader before anyone could react. Looking at the eyeball hanging on the tip of the sword, the anger in his heart did not subside at all. Instead, it became more vigorous. As a transmigrator from the era of information explosion, Andre could not tolerate two things the most. One of them was child abuse, and the other was cannibalism. The former represented the complete loss of morality, and the latter represented the annihilation of human nature. But this group of scumbags in front of him actually touched two bottom lines at the same time. Kill. Kill all of them. The extreme anger triggered the tyranny hidden in the bottom of his heart. You all deserve to die. After squeezing these words out of his mouth, Andre quickly rushed to the second target closest to him, only to see a sharp, cold light in the air, and another unlucky to have his heart was pierced through. He was like a lion that had gone berserk. Everywhere he passed, there was no one who could withstand his attack. Seeing the second bandit slowly falling down while clutching his chest, Fiona, who had been standing by the side, finally snapped back to reality. She immediately raised her flintlock and aimed at the two guys in front of her. Without hesitation, she pulled the trigger. Bang! Bang! Accompanied by fire, white smoke, and a loud roar, the two bandits who wanted to push the girl to the ground fell to the ground. In the situation of less than 15 meters, even if they wore breastplates, they might not be able to withstand the power of the lead bullet, not to mention that they were shirtless. Unsurprisingly, there was a huge horn-shaped wound on their chest. The bullet that fully released kinetic energy caused far more damage to the body than any cold weapon, especially the unlucky one who was still alive, lying on the ground and screaming in pain. Magic! It's the power of magic. Run! A bandit who realized that the situation was not good shuddered and shouted for his companions to retreat. As everyone knew, the guts of the gangsters were always inversely proportional to the strength they usually showed. They might be able to bully honest people, but once faced with a strong enemy who really dared to fight, they would collapse faster than anyone else. This was also why all the regular armies were very resistant to the gangsters. The reason was very simple. These trash were simply mud that could not support the wall. Perhaps in normal times, Andre would not choose to chase a group of bandits who were not even professionals. But now he was completely enraged. He did not intend to leave anyone alive, so he chased after them without saying a word. The bandits did not even have time to run out of the alley, and they were all dead in an instant. After killing all the adults, Andre quickly turned his eyes to the boys around 10 years old. His face showed that he could not bear to see them die. His hand that was holding the rapier too hard, and his joints were a little white. Although he had made up his mind to eliminate the source of the problem, but when it was time to do it, he suddenly struggled in his heart. Of course, cannibalism was a great sin. Any society with normal values would not tolerate it. This was the same whether it was on Earth or Orion. But these children were forced to do it, and there was a bastard who instigated them. So they chose to eat people. They ate people to survive. In order to survive, as an intelligent creature, was it wrong to use all the means you know to survive? At least, Andre did not think it was wrong. Just as he was hesitating whether or not he should try to lend a helping hand, a strange smile suddenly appeared on the oldest boy's face. The next second, he threw out the iron piece in his hand and then jumped up on all fours like an animal. He opened his mouth and revealed his white teeth, trying to push Andre to the ground. Ow! 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 The other boys howled and also jumped on all fours. They launched a siege from different directions. The cooperation between them was just like a pack of wolves. It seemed that they were ready to tear the most threatening target into pieces first. Andre didn't expect these children to be so beastly. He couldn't react in time and was immediately pushed to the ground. Then, he felt a sharp pain on his arm. He saw a boy tearing open his clothes with his teeth and biting down on his left arm. He kept shaking his head and tearing at his arm. Shock. Unconcealable shock. He finally understood why these children's eyes always showed a terrifying light. It turned out that they were raised as animals like cats and dogs since they were young. Just when a boy opened his mouth and wanted to bite his throat, a figure less than a meter long jumped out of the darkness. She was like a nimble cat, and without making any sound, she directly stabbed a short knife into the back of the boy's heart. Pooh! With a muffled sound, scarlet blood splattered everywhere. It sprayed all over Andre's face and body. The sticky touch and the strong smell made him want to vomit. Chapter 494. Hey, don't just stand there. Get up. These ghost babies aren't easy to deal with. You better buck up, or else I can't guarantee that we won't be eaten by them. As she spoke, the short figure took off her cap, revealing a cute baby face and two excessively plump peaks. She was none other than the halfling thief, Portia. Andre resisted the urge to vomit and quickly kicked away another boy who was biting his arm. He wiped the blood off his face and asked, "Ghost babies? Are you talking about these little kids?" The big-breasted lowly rolled her eyes in annoyance and explained, "Nonsense. Who else could I be talking about other than them? Also, don't look down on these guys. They're all born with a special potion and have undergone cruel training and elimination. Their mortality rate is as high as 90%. Those who can survive are all elites, and their battle prowess is comparable to large hunting dogs. Many guilds in the city have secretly nurtured some of them, and they're a very troublesome type of enemy." "Is that so? Looks like this city is even dirtier and more sinful than I imagined. Maybe it's time for it to be purified." Andre narrowed his eyes and spoke in an icy tone. "Purify Valens City? Why would you have such a terrifying thought? Did you hit your head?" Portia raised her head and glared at Andre with an odd gaze, as if she were looking at an idiot. As a native of Valens City, she knew better than any outsider just how terrifying the power hidden behind the chaos in this city was. This was especially true for the 6 major guilds that stood at the apex. Their power was much stronger than the pirate King Francis in name. Once they joined forces, they could easily gather thousands of hired thugs. It was once said that a quarter of Valens City belonged to pirates, another quarter belonged to talents with various skills, and the rest were all under the control of the 6 major guilds. As long as they wanted to, they could control the rise and fall of prices at any time, and force more than half of the city's residents to obey their will. It could be said that if a pirate captain offended these guys, then no one would buy the goods he stole back. At the same time, they wouldn't be able to obtain any supplies. Even the sailors on the ship wouldn't be able to do business with them if they wanted to have some fun. Andre gently moved the flesh on his arm that had been bitten off. He took a deep breath and sneered. "No, there's nothing wrong with my head. Valens City's underground guilds aren't as strong as you think. They seem to be able to call the wind and summon the rain here, but they're nothing without the support of the pirates. I don't need to do much. I just need to seal off the sea for a month or so, and these fellows' rule will quickly collapse. I don't even need to do anything. Those thugs who can't get food will tear them to pieces. All right, it's still too early to discuss this. Let's clean up the enemies in front of us first." In fact, the so-called 6 great guilds were far less threatening than the pirates in his eyes. The former was just a parasite attached to the latter. No matter how scary it looked, as long as the host died, it would naturally not continue to exist. Even if the latter lost their base of operations in the Sardinia Islands, they were still a group of headache-inducing enemies. As long as he could take care of the pirates, then a group of rats that couldn't see the light of day wasn't worth mentioning. Just as the two were talking, the boys who had transformed into beasts once again launched an attack from all directions. Because they were on all fours, their movements were very nimble, especially when it came to climbing. They were like monkeys jumping onto walls in a few moves in an attempt to take advantage of the height advantage to seize the initiative. Unfortunately, these attacks without any technique might be good against ordinary people, but they were still too inexperienced against true professionals. Just as one of them pounced down from the roof, Portia immediately took out a throwing knife and threw it with all her might. A sharp, cold light flashed through the air. Puffed. The tip of the knife directly pierced through the throat, and hot blood flowed out of the wound continuously. In just a few seconds, the trachea was blocked. Although the boy opened his mouth and struggled desperately to breathe in fresh air, it was all in vain. Not long after, he fell to the ground and turned into a cold corpse. On the other side, Andre went on a killing spree. Two thin swords were waved quickly, and every time they crossed, he would stab into the heart, throat, eyes, and other vital points. In just a few minutes, he had killed all 6 of the boys who were called ghost babies. Looking at the pairs of eyes on the young corpses that were full of yearning for life, his heart was extremely heavy. He didn't even feel any pain from the bloody wound on his arm, allowing the blood to slowly drip down. Portia clearly saw something. She walked over and sighed slightly as she comforted him. Don't think too much, and don't feel too guilty. This isn't your fault. These children were no longer human from the moment they received training. Not only did the magic potion give them bodies that surpass ordinary people, it also destroyed their ability to think. They would do whatever their master told them to do. Situations like this are quite common in Valen City. Many prostitutes who accidentally get pregnant will choose to sell the children they give birth to because they simply don't have the ability to raise the next generation. If they take the children with them, they will starve to death before long. Tell me about the potion. Who invented it? And who was the first to put it into use? Andre's voice was still cold, and he didn't feel any better because of the other party's comforting words. On the contrary, he especially wanted to find out who was so inhumane as to use a group of children as experimental subjects. As a mage, he could easily see that this potion was still in an incomplete state. In other words, someone was constantly adjusting it through large-scale experiments, and these children were only expendable objects like lab rats. Unless the potion was completely completed, the tragedy of dying from exhaustion would never stop. All right, since you want to know so much, there's no harm in telling you. When the pirate King Francis first came to power, he ordered the mages on the island to develop a magic potion that could increase battle strength. 2 years later, a necromancer called Cecil claimed that he had successfully made a sample. Following that, more and more people joined the experiment under the urging of the 6 great guilds. The result is what you just saw. This is a magic potion that can greatly increase one's physical fitness. The only drawback is that it can only be used on children under the age of 10. Moreover, the energy contained within the potion will damage their brains. Generally speaking, they will only live to 15 years of age before dying due to various problems. Apart from that, it also has another side effect, and that is eating people. All children who have taken the potion will have their sense of taste mutated and will develop a strong appetite for the flesh of their own kind. They will fall sick if they don't eat for a few days, and some would rather starve to death than eat anything else. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business. Those evil mages on the island aren't so easy to deal with. Saying this, a trace of fear appeared on Portia's face, as if she had recalled some unpleasant memories. Chapter 495. There is no doubt that mages were a group of people who stood at the peak of power at any time and place. Anything that involved them would usually not be too simple. Andre felt an unusual aura from the halfling thief's words, and immediately asked, "Do you know Cecil's origin? Where did he come from? What is his mage level? And how are his relationships?" Bordia shrugged helplessly and replied, "I'm sorry, but on this island, every mage's information is confidential. I only know that he's about 40 years old this year, has a head of greasy black hair, and often appears in the magic material store in the upper city wearing a red envelope. If you want to know more, then you'll have to spend a lot of money to buy it from the guild. But I personally don't recommend you do that, because most of the time they are not trustworthy. Maybe they will sell your information to the other party right after you buy the information." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. It seems that this matter can't be resolved in a short time. We have to put it aside first and wait for the investigation to be clear." Although he was very eager to immediately tear the inventor of the potion and the promoter of the live experiment into pieces, he was not blinded by anger and chose to endure for the time being. After all, before the mage profession was completely recovered, rashly clashing with the only supernatural organization on the Sardinia Islands was definitely not the way of a smart person. After understanding this point, Andre slowly calmed his agitated emotions. He sized up the halfling and suddenly found that the other party was emitting a faint smell of blood, especially on his boots, which had many dry blood spots. He subconsciously frowned and asked in a low voice, "Did you just kill someone?" "That's right. I killed a few of Iron Fist Garrick's trusted aides. I'm now rushing to the Thousand Sails Inn to watch a good show. You and Fiona should come along and meet our collaborator." Saying this, a gloating smile appeared on Portia's face. Collaborator? Hearing this, Andre's expression changed slightly, and a bad premonition surged in his heart. "What's going on? Didn't I tell you to keep a low profile? You should understand that plans can never keep up with changes. Also, that poor rookie Mabel was almost bewitched. If I hadn't been careful, he might have already fallen under the skirt of the charming witch Maris." At this point, Boscia gestured to the panicking Fiona to calm her down. Then, she continued, "But don't worry too much. I've already reached an agreement with her to work together to get rid of Iron Fist Garrick. So your brother is safe for the time being." "Who is Maris, the charming witch?" Andre frowned and asked. "An ambitious bitch. When she was 13 years old, she learned how to use her beautiful face, beautiful body, and all kinds of skills to seduce and please men. When she was 16 years old, she became a famous social butterfly in the downtown area. Later, some people even said that she mastered a magical ability to control men's minds. Relying on this woman used assassination, poison, and a series of other methods to swallow up many small guilds in a short few years. Now, she's finally set her sights on Garrick, who occupies 4 streets. If I'm not wrong, she wants to join an underground guild in order to gain more power. All in all, Maris is a dangerous woman. Not only is she sinister and vicious, but her personality is also fickle. The only praiseworthy thing about her is that she has a good reputation. As long as she makes a promise, she hasn't gone back on it. Boscia said everything she knew in one breath, with no intention of hiding anything. Because she instinctively sensed danger, the atmosphere in Valen City had suddenly become tense for some reason, as if something big was brewing. In particular, more and more pirate ships were starting to gather in the harbor. Anyone who wasn't blind could see it. A woman like the Black Widow. Sounds like she has some value. Andre muttered to himself and immediately said to the halfling, "Since that's the case, then lead the way. I just happen to want to see the methods of this enchantress. I hope she won't disappoint me too much. Come with me. I hope you won't be like most men and climb in her bed not long after you meet her." After speaking, Boscia sized him up with a distrustful gaze for a few seconds, then turned and walked in the direction of the inn. Don't worry. I'm not interested in wanting women. It doesn't matter how pretty she is." As a modern man, Andre didn't place much importance on the so-called chastity, but he still kept a respectful distance from women who used their bodies as tools and weapons. He didn't want to get infected with venereal disease at such a young age, nor did he want to have his throat pierced by a dagger after a certain night of pleasure. Women were perhaps the most perfect creatures created by nature. Not only did they have a stronger immune system than men, but they also had stronger anti-aging abilities and a longer lifespan. Their sense of danger, endurance, ability to withstand pressure, intuition, resistance to attacks, and so on were superior in almost every aspect. Even their ability to distinguish colors was much stronger. If it weren't for women being especially emotional, fantasizing, and bleeding every month, in addition to being constantly instilled with the idea that they were the weaker group, there probably wouldn't be anything left for men in this world. Of course, there was no lack of exceptions in any race or group. There would always be a small group of women who could successfully break free from their limitations and evolve with strong ambitions. For example, the famous Empress Wu Zetian, the grandmother of Emperor Wu of Han, Empress Dowager Do, and others like Isabel I, the queen who started the glorious era of Spain, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who laid the foundation for England's prosperity, and Catherine II, the Russian empress who was placed in the same position as Peter the Great. These women were all like blooming roses, overshadowing all the men around them. They even had to temporarily abandon the so-called dignity of men and crawl at their feet, trembling. Facts had proven that if a woman had enough ambition and intelligence to match it, then her achievements would definitely surpass more than 90% of men. At the same time, the degree of ruthlessness and mercilessness was far from what men could compare to. Looking at the strong women in history who seized power from their own sons, which one of them didn't have their hands stained with blood? Some even sacrificed their own flesh and blood in order to keep their power. Chapter 496. At this moment, in the innermost room on the second floor of the Thousand Sails Hotel, a naked man and woman were having an intense battle. The man was none other than Garrick, who was nicknamed Iron Fist. The one who kept screaming was the charm witch, Maris. "Oh, bitch, how dare you!" Garrick roared as he jumped up from the bed, grabbed a chair, and threw it out. The intense pain did not make him lose his fighting strength. Instead, it aroused an unprecedented ferocity, especially those two bloodshot eyes. He looked like a demon that had crawled out from the abyss. The knowledgeable Maris laughed as she dodged the chair that flew over. She mocked with a smug face, "Idiot, why don't you go and find out who I am? How can you not pay for sleeping with me so many times? Now that I've taken a fancy to your territory, I can only ask you to die. Don't worry. In order to prevent loneliness on the road, I've already gotten people to eliminate all your trusted subordinates. They should be waiting for you in another world now." Hearing this, Garrick was so angry that his entire body trembled. He raised his arm and pointed at the naked woman standing in front of him as he roared, You damn bitch. I'll kill you." "Ha! Then what are you waiting for? Come on, let me see if you can still maintain the same fighting strength without that thing." Maris immediately snapped her fingers as she spoke. "Pa!" With a crisp sound, the cabinet in the room was suddenly knocked open. A young man holding a shield and a long sword rushed out from inside. He was none other than Fiona's brother, Mabel. He had been hiding in the cabinet from the beginning and had seen the entire process. At this moment, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He subconsciously tightened his legs. There was no longer any infatuation in his eyes when he looked at Maris. Instead, it was replaced by fear and vigilance. Terrifying, too vicious. Any man who witnessed this scene with their own eyes would probably feel the same way and feel very sad for Garrick. Mabel did not dare to imagine if something similar happened to him one day. Would he have the courage to continue living? Maris obviously noticed the change in the young man's attitude. The corner of her mouth immediately curled up slightly as she teased in a playful tone. "What are you waiting for, my dear big boy? Quickly get rid of this disgusting trash. If you're quick enough, you may be able to do something else before the dwarf comes back." After saying that, she opened her arms and displayed her alluring figure to her heart's content. It was as if she was hinting at something, but also as if she was testing him. However, Mabel wasn't in the mood for that at all. She didn't even look at him as she raised her shield and took the initiative to attack. As an out-and-out rookie, he was very clear that his combat experience could not be compared to Garrick's. Therefore, he absolutely could not allow his opponent to seize the initiative. Otherwise, he would be defeated after a few rounds. The only way was to take advantage of the fact that his opponent was heavily injured to continuously attack, and attack. "Mabel, why are you here?" After clearly seeing who the person who suddenly appeared was, Garrick and the others widened their eyes, their faces filled with disbelief. After all, the two of them had known each other for a long time. Just a few hours ago, they had reached a series of cooperation agreements. He could not believe that in such a short period of time, the other party was going to kill him. Why? How could this be? He couldn't figure it out. He couldn't figure it out at all. Garrick's mind was filled with questions as he casually picked up the drawer on the bedside table and used it as a weapon to knock away the longsword. Following that, he turned around and used his right shoulder to block in front of him. With a bang, his shoulder collided with the shield. Seeing that her attack had missed, Mabel immediately activated the berserk ability that she had yet to master. In just a few seconds, the muscles and blood vessels on her body bulged, revealing a dark red color. He opened his mouth wide and took in large mouthfuls of oxygen as he roared in a low voice, "I'm sorry, boss. I can't help it. For the future of my sister and I, please die." As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying force came from his shield. Garrick felt as if he had been hit by an animal like a rhinoceros or an elephant. His entire body was lifted into the air and flew a few meters away. In the end, he crashed into a wall and spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 497. Huh, 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 kill, kill, kill. Along with the secretion of large amounts of adrenaline, Mabel had completely lost her rationality, transforming into a beast that only knew how to kill. No emotions, no thinking, no consciousness. All that was left was the instinct that was carved into her bones. He rushed forward at an extremely fast speed, swinging his shield and smashing it down. Once, twice, thrice, asterisk bang, 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 bang. Asterisk in a short span of a minute, Mabel had swung her shield at least 60 times. Every time, she used all of her strength to forcefully smash Garrick into a bloody mess. His entire head was like a puddle of paste. His skull, sternum, chin, shoulder blades, and basically every part of his body that protruded from the surface of his body were all shattered and fractured. There was no need to ask. Given the current situation, even a bishop who had mastered level 5 divine spells would not be able to do anything. Tragic. Too tragic. Garrick's corpse could no longer be described as a bloody mess. It was a mixture of bones, minced meat, and fresh blood. The scene was so bloody that even Maris could not help but vomit. This ambitious woman did not expect that the young man who usually looked harmless would be so violent and bloodthirsty. She did not dare to look down on him at all. Asterisk huff. 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 Asterisk after killing Garrick, Mabel's berserk state did not immediately disappear. She remained at the same spot, breathing rapidly. She quickly locked on her next target. Without any hesitation, he quickly got up and rushed to the naked woman, raising his shield and smashing it down. "No, no, no, stop. I order you to stop." Maris, who had no time to dodge, began to scream in panic. Seeing that the shield was getting closer and closer to her, she could not care about anything else. She quickly raised the gemstone ring on her finger and shouted, "Errol's, activate Berserk Charm." Instantly, a ray of red light shot into Mabel's eyes, but unfortunately, it had no effect at all. In fact, as long as one had a bit of common knowledge about magic, they would know that when a warrior fell into a berserk state, their brain would be in an extremely chaotic state. Charm spells would not be effective at all, let alone spells. They could not even communicate normally during this period of time. If a teammate made any threatening actions, they would immediately become the next target to be attacked. Bang! The wooden shield, which was covered in blood and minced meat, smashed into Maris' face with a heavy thud. Under the effect of the huge impact and inertia, her whole body flew into the air. Her nose, which was originally firm, was shattered, and one of her front teeth flew out of her mouth. Scarlet blood mixed with snot and tears flowed all over her face. In the end, she hit the door heavily and fell to the ground with a plop, coughing nonstop. Cough, cough, cough. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Why am I so unlucky to encounter such an inconceivable thing? Maurice cursed softly as she wiped away her tears. She quickly got up from the ground and ran toward the door that was not far away from her. Just as she left her original spot, the crazy Mabel descended from the sky. She crashed into the ground with the shield in her hand, causing wood shavings to fly everywhere, creating a large crater in the ground. If she hadn't moved fast enough, Maris would have suffered from comminuted fractures all over her body. In addition, her internal organs would have ruptured and bled profusely. After all, she was only an assassin who was slightly more agile. Her physique was not much different from an ordinary person's. She would not be able to withstand such terrifying power. Even Garrick, a professional warrior, had been smashed into a meat patty by the shield. If an ordinary person were to receive such a blow, they would be half crippled, if not dead. The incomplete berserk had greatly increased Mabel's strength and physique. The reddened muscles on her body were extremely exaggerated. They looked as if they were cast from copper and iron. Her clothes were almost bursting apart. The originally heavy medium shield seemed to be weightless in her hands. She did not show any signs of fatigue, even after waving it around for a few minutes. She was like a heavy road roller. Everywhere she passed, there was a mess. Be it the bed, the cabinet, the table, or the chair, everything was smashed into smithereens. There were several times when Maurice wanted to escape through the door, but she was forced to retreat. She dodged around in a sorry state, and soon there were several bruises on her body. One of her arms was accidentally broken, and in just a few seconds, it swelled to the size of a thigh. Her movements became slower and slower as she lost her stamina. Especially since she had fought naked with Garrick for more than an hour not too long ago, she was now extremely tired. She gradually felt that her strength was falling short of her will. Seeing that the life-threatening shield was inches away from her, Mara's face revealed a look of despair. At the same time, she shouted in her heart, "Bastard! Am I going to die in the hands of this idiot today?" At this critical moment, a loud bang suddenly came from the tightly shut door. Following that, 3 people rushed in from the corridor on the second floor. It was Andre and his group. It was unknown if it was because the noise was too loud, but Mabel stopped her pursuit. She turned around and looked at the door with a hostile gaze. She let out a low roar of unknown meaning. "Oh gods! Who can tell me what is going on?" Portia's eyes were wide open. She stared at the messy room and the corpse that had long been unrecognizable. Her face revealed an expression of shock. She did not expect that the situation would suddenly spiral out of control in the few hours she had left. Especially with Mabel's current state, anyone with a discerning eye could see that something was wrong. This was because the berserk ability usually lasted for a very short period of time. Moreover, it placed a huge burden on the body. Usually, the user would fall into a state of disconnection after half a minute. However, Mabel had obviously been in a berserk state for more than a minute. This could be seen from the color of her muscles and the heat she was emitting. However, she did not show any signs of exhaustion. She still maintained a vigorous fighting spirit. "Brother, is it you? Oh my God, how did you become like this?" Fiona covered her mouth and quickly took 2 steps forward, wanting to grab her brother's hand. However, Andre pulled the girl back and warned her in a low voice, "Don't move. Your brother is now in a berserk state. He doesn't recognize anyone. Rashly approaching him will only lead to his attack." As a knowledgeable mage, he was no stranger to the berserk ability unique to the barbarian warriors. He had even personally researched what it was that allowed these fellows from the wilderness to greatly increase their physical attributes in a short period of time. Chapter 498. The reason was simple. In fact, it was only due to the large secretion of adrenaline and the complete release of the instincts hidden in the depths of the brain. Of course, other than that, it might have something to do with genetics. After all, adrenaline could bring more energy, especially increasing the oxygen carried in the blood, providing a steady flow of energy for the cells and muscles. However, ordinary people could not bear too much of it. Otherwise, it would lead to severe cerebral hemorrhage. "Hey, you guys quickly think of a way to get this lunatic away. He almost killed me." Seeing that the reinforcements had arrived, Maris immediately distanced herself from the danger zone and opened her leaky mouth to shout for help. Her current miserable appearance had nothing to do with sex appeal. Not only was her proud face swollen, but her skin was also covered with sticky blood. If she had been half a minute late, she would have been lying on the ground with Garrick. "This is the charming which you spoke of, Maris? How come I don't see how charming she is?" Andre teased with a wicked sense of humor. Portia laughed mockingly and spread out her hands. "Hee, that's her. However, I didn't expect that Maris, who has always boasted of being able to conquer any man in the world, would actually be beaten to such a state by a man. I don't know if this is retribution or irony. It had to be said that a woman's jealousy was quite terrifying. Just by listening to the gigantic Lowly's gloating tone, one could tell that she was itching to pull out her dagger and slash Garrick's swollen face twice, turning him into an ugly monster. Damn it, don't just make sarcastic remarks. Hurry up and save me. If I die, you guys will never get any benefits. Maris cursed loudly as she stared at the youth who was breathing rapidly. Her eyes were filled with vigilance, afraid that he would pounce on her again and launch a fierce attack. Portia immediately showed a disdainful expression toward her threat. She then turned to Andre and asked, "Tell me, what are you going to do?" Mabel obviously doesn't have any rationality. I can guarantee that if he takes another step forward, he will definitely react violently. It wouldn't be strange if he did something like exchanging a life for a life. After all, Berserk is an ability that maximizes destructive power. Of course, it's not a bad idea to just stand there and wait, but I can't guarantee that he won't die from blood spurting out of his nostrils. Many barbarian warriors who went berserk had similar situations. After listening to the words of the halfling, Andre rubbed his chin and pondered for a few seconds. In the end, he sighed helplessly and took out a bottle of hypnotic potion from his waist pouch. He gently pulled out the cork and warned the others, "Hold your breath. Unless you want to lie on the ground and sleep for a few hours, don't breathe in the smoke before I tell you that it's safe." As soon as he finished speaking, the pink gas evaporated into the air from the mouth of the bottle, filling the entire room in just a few seconds. Everyone present covered their noses and mouths. Only Mabel continued to open her mouth wide, breathing in large mouthfuls of air filled with magic power. Not long after, her eyelids began to droop, and her entire body swayed, looking as if she would collapse at any moment. There was no need to ask to know that the hypnotic gas had begun to take effect. However, because a berserk state would greatly increase a person's willpower, they would have a strong resistance to many spells. Otherwise, after inhaling so much gas, they would have long fallen asleep. One had to know that this small bottle of hypnotic potion was enough for at least 5 cows and 10 horses. If an ordinary person smelled it, they would immediately fall into a deep sleep. 10 seconds passed. Mabel was still barely keeping her eyes open. Half a minute passed. She couldn't help but doze off, looking as if she was drunk. Her footsteps were no longer as steady as before. 1 minute passed. She finally couldn't resist the strong sleepiness and fell to the ground with a plop, followed by earth-shattering snoring. Phew! It's finally done. I didn't waste a bottle of potion. Seeing that it was a success, Andre secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately opened the window and let the remaining hypnotic gas in the room drift away with the wind. To be honest, he had no idea if a bottle of hypnotic potion would be able to affect the berserk Mabel. This was because the results of the previous tests on the barbarian warriors showed that after these fellows went berserk, whether it was a mobilization spell, hypnosis spell, or charm humans, the effects were very limited. High-level barbarian warriors could even use their tensed muscles to resist magic missiles. As long as they didn't hit a vital point, they would continue to fiercely attack the enemy until either they or the enemy fell. From a certain perspective, Berserk was like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could make the user temporarily lose their sense of pain, greatly increasing their strength and physique. At the same time, it could cause the user to lose their rationality and completely rely on their instincts to move. They wouldn't even care if they were injured or dead. After Berserk ended, they would fall into a predicament where their entire body would be powerless. If the opponent could last through this period, then the one who would die would definitely be the barbarian warrior who went Berserk. As Mabel fell into a deep sleep, the Berserk state on her body was quickly removed. The red and hot muscles on her body slowly returned to normal, and her breathing became stable. There were no signs that she had just gone berserk. However, just in case, Andre still squatted down to carefully check the condition of the youth's body. In the end, he found that not only was there no problem, there wasn't even any muscle fatigue. "How's my brother? Is he injured?" Fiona asked with great concern. "He's very healthy. I can't see any sequelae from using Berserk at all. I'm willing to bet that it's either his physique that's special, or there's another special bloodline hidden in him," Andre replied softly. In fact, the humans in Orair, in ancient times, many of them had married with other races and gave birth to all kinds of mixed-blood descendants. However, as time went by, generation after generation, they became diluted and finally became no different from purebred humans. However, just like what was said in genetics, those genes that belonged to other races did not completely disappear. Instead, they were temporarily hidden. Once they were stimulated by the outside world, there was a possibility that they could be awakened at any time. It was just like some people who were born with some congenital diseases, even though their parents were very healthy. The reason was that the defects hidden in their memories were suddenly awakened. Andre himself was also a good example. The fire elemental bloodline in his body was originally so thin that it was negligible. However, with the help of the system, it could be immediately activated. It was precisely because of his personal experience that he felt that Mabel was likely to be in a similar situation. Chapter 499, Alien Bloodline. How is that possible? Our parents are pure humans, and I can't feel any special ability in my body. Fiona's eyes widened in surprise. She could not believe what Andre said. As a priest, she could keenly sense all the abnormalities in her body, especially everything related to her bloodline. With the help of divine spells, there was nowhere to hide. After all, most alien bloodlines more or less had some special ability. If there was, it could be detected in an instant. Andre obviously knew this, so he shook his head and explained, "Don't be so sure. Your parents are ordinary people, but it doesn't mean that your ancestors were also ordinary people. What's more, awakening after a generation is not rare. The reason why you can't feel it is because it hasn't been awakened yet. Your brother has undoubtedly awakened, but I can't be sure which kind it is. At first, I thought that he could use Berserk, so he should be a barbarian bloodline. But now it seems that my judgment was a little wrong. Barbarian bloodline alone is not enough to let him persist in Berserk for so long, and there are no sequelae. Well, let's stop talking about this for now. Let's deal with the more troublesome matter first." Saying that, he took out a dozen gold coins from his pocket and threw it to the halfling thief. "Use this money to send the people in the corridor away. I can already hear them going up the stairs. Don't worry, leave it to me." Bordia took the gold coins and walked out of the room without saying a word. Not long after, she heard the loud voice of the innkeeper outside. It was obvious that he was asking what had happened and how much damage had been done to the furniture and decorations in the room. After all, the battle just now was so fierce, especially the loud sound of the shield hitting the wall, the floor, and the table. As long as one was not deaf, they could hear it clearly. Fortunately, the big-breasted lowly was experienced in dealing with this kind of situation. In just a few seconds, the quarrel had quieted down. It must have been the compensation of the gold coins. Otherwise, with a merchant's profit-oriented personality, he would not have let it go so easily. After making sure that the people outside wouldn't barge in, Andre stood up and went straight to Maurice. He sized her up with a scrutinizing gaze. After a full minute, he slowly said, "Madam, your current physical condition isn't optimistic. I suggest that you find a priest to treat you as soon as possible. As for the cooperation, we can talk about it later. Anyway, things like this aren't urgent." "Oomph, you make it sound nice, but isn't it all thanks to you guys that I'm like this now? Don't you think you should take responsibility?" Seeing that Mabel had fallen into a coma, Maurice's worried heart finally relaxed. Her attitude suddenly became strong. It seemed that if they couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation or compensation, she wouldn't let this matter go so easily. Hee. Then how do you think you should take responsibility?" The corner of Andre's mouth curled up slightly as he asked with a light smile. He was already prepared for this ambitious woman to use this opportunity to threaten him, so he appeared very calm. especially the playful look in his eyes, which gave people an unfathomable feeling. Maurice, who was able to deal with so many men, was naturally not an idiot. She instantly had a premonition that the situation was not good. However, she didn't want to give up this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Therefore, she quickly pretended to be a victim and probed, "I think that if we change the allocation of Garrick's inheritance, it should be able to compensate for the harm I've suffered. I believe that 25% is a good amount. What do you think?" Hearing this, Andre laughed, and he laughed very happily. He pointed at the young man who was sleeping soundly on the side and mocked with a slightly contemptuous tone, "Take a good look at Mabel who is lying there, and then recall what happened just now. If I were you, I would keep my mouth shut and obediently carry out the conditions that we agreed on beforehand without the slightest bit of compromise. Do you know? It has always been the privilege of the strong to change the conditions at will. The weak can only give in and obey. I don't understand. After experiencing the excitement of brushing shoulders with the Grim Reaper, how can you still have the courage to continue violating our interests? Could it be because I look too young? Or do you think that your clumsy acting skills can deceive my eyes and take advantage of me? Too naive, also very stupid. Since you've given me a new condition, then I'll give you a new condition as well. Immediately kneel down and swear that you'll give me everything, including your loyalty. Otherwise, I don't mind having another corpse on the ground. Obey or die. It's a very simple choice, isn't it?" After saying that, Andre instantly drew out his rapier at extremely fast speed and pressed it against Maurice's weak neck. His eyes were filled with a sharp light because he noticed that Maurice subconsciously wanted to touch the gemstone ring on her finger. Without a doubt, it was a magical item, and from the bewitching light emitted by the gemstone, there was no doubt that it had something to do with control and hypnosis. Although there was no way to feel the fluctuation of magical energy at the moment. But as a mage, if she couldn't even determine this point, then she could just die. Feeling the cold touch on her skin, Maurice immediately stopped all her movements. She didn't even dare to open her mouth to explain. She even held her breath temporarily, afraid that any unnecessary action would cause a misunderstanding and cause her to die in vain. She could feel the biting, cold, murderous intent from the big boy in front of her, especially his two eyes, which were cold as if he was looking at a corpse. But even so, Andre didn't let his guard down. He still carefully stared at her, and at the same time, he continued to force her with a smile on his face. "Don't act rashly, Mississippi. Now, slowly take off the ring and place it in front of me. If I find out that you make the slightest sound or have any signs of activating magic, this sword will immediately pierce through your throat. Also, for the sake of protecting women, I suggest that you don't expect any help from the metal claw hidden behind your back. Please believe me, it will only bring death, a painful death. Damn it, how can there be a monster like you in this world?" Seeing that her last trick had been exposed, Maurice cursed softly as she gently pushed the metal claw away. At the same time, she carefully took off the ring according to his request. She didn't play any tricks during the entire process. Chapter 500. As a woman who had been fooling around on the streets for a long time, Maris had seen all kinds of people. Among them, there were greedy smugglers, ambitious guild leaders, pirates who did not have a tomorrow after today, beggars who struggled to survive, and gangsters who lived a drunken life all day long. However, there had never been a person who could make her feel as hopeless as Andre. This magical ring that could forcefully charm others was Maris' final trump card. Back then, in order to get her hands on it, she did not hesitate to give up her young body and let an old man in his 60s play with her for an entire year. In the end, she had almost died in the dark dungeon. Fortunately, her hard work paid off. After going through all kinds of hardships, she finally managed to strangle the old man who had violated her to death one night, snatched his magical ring, and escaped successfully. Ever since she had gotten her hands on this treasure, she had immediately made a name for herself in the chaotic lower city district. Coupled with her beautiful face and curvaceous body, Many men had unknowingly been controlled by the power of magic. In the end, they did not even know how they had died. However, there was a saying that knowledge determined one's fate and experience determined one's height. As a woman who had always lived at the bottom of society, Maris had never left the Sardinia Islands and did not know that the elites of the upper class would definitely not be bewitched by mere beauty. Generally speaking, they would already have relations with all kinds of women under the arrangement of their elders when they were in their teens, from mature women in their 30s to little girls in their teens. They were cute, sexy, gentle, shrewish, and all kinds of personalities. In the end, they would even have to kill the one they liked the most with their own hands. The goal was to cultivate the ability to control women so that they would not lose their composure no matter how stunning the woman was. It had to be said that this method was perverted and cruel at the same time. However, it was undeniable that after experiencing so much, most of the children of nobles matured very quickly. Even if Maris was 10 times more beautiful, she would not be able to bewitch him, let alone Maris, who had just crossed the passing line for beauty. It was obvious that the illusions in the past had given her some kind of illusion, thinking that her beauty could conquer any man, and that no one was an exception. Otherwise, she would not have made such a foolish plan to kill Garrick in bed, instead of arranging a well-prepared siege. Although Andre wasn't one of those nobles who had played with dozens of women, he wasn't a rookie either. Thus, he didn't have the mentality of being protective of the fairer sex. He completely ignored the other party's pretentious resentment and coquettish appearance. He directly pulled out another thin sword, picked up the ring, and kept it in his bag. After doing all this, he withdrew the weapon from his neck and bowed slightly with a smile. "I'm very sorry for using such extreme means just now. I hope you don't mind too much. I'm usually very gentlemanly towards women. After all, a magic ring is an extremely dangerous item. It's best for it to be kept by a professional like me." "Oof. You're the most despicable and shameless bastard I've ever met. Compared to you, those hooligans on the street are as pure as heavenly creatures. Tell me, what do you plan to do with me?" Maurice, who had lost her final trump card, opened her arms wide and lay naked on the floor. She put on a posture of desperation, trying to gain some sympathy. I'll take that as a compliment for now. Thank you." Andre didn't care at all about the sarcasm in the other party's tone as he shrugged with a smile. "Like I said just now, submit or die. It's a simple choice. I just happen to need someone who has some understanding of the underground guilds in Valence City to take care of some problems that I can't deal with personally. You just happen to be the most suitable person." "Me?" Maurice pointed at her broken nose, a trace of surprise on her face. She didn't understand what the other party saw in her. Andre nodded lightly and explained, "That's right, you. You have the means, ambition, and ability. The only thing you lack is knowledge, experience, and personal strength. The most important thing is that you're a woman, so you're easier to control than a man. You also won't attract the attention of others easily. After all, you're an outlier in a place where men dominate. Even if you climb to the top, you'll have to be on guard against the daggers that can stab you from the shadows at any time. Thus, you need to find a strong enough backer. But don't worry, as long as you complete the tasks on time, I promise you'll have a beautiful future. At the very least, it'll be much better than hanging around at the bottom of the gang." Become someone else's subordinate? Maurice was stunned when she realized the meaning of Andre's words. She'd never considered this problem before, or more accurately, she'd never even thought about it. As a woman full of desire for power, her goal in life was to strive for a place in the underworld and control her own fate. At the same time, she wanted to prove that women weren't inferior to men in any aspect. Of course, the main reason was that she seriously lacked a sense of security. Perhaps it was because of her childhood experience of wandering around, or perhaps it was because she didn't want to be a man's plaything. In short, she was extremely thirsty for power and wanted to prove her value. Thus, she subconsciously rejected offering her loyalty to anyone because she had already given all her loyalty to her own ambitions. Noticing that Maurice's face was a little uncertain, Andre decided to help her. He took out the gemstone ring he'd just received and gently stroked the cat's eye stone and laid on it. He whispered, "I think you should know very well what kind of spell is stored in this ring. It can not only forcibly control a person's mind for a short period of time, but can also hypnotize the target. Unless it's a special individual who's completely immune to enchantment spells, no one can resist its imperceptible ability. Now tell me, are you going to take the initiative to cooperate, or do you want me to use force? Of course, in addition to the above two options, you can also choose to die. I'm a person who respects women very much. If you insist on using your life to defend your freedom, then I won't stop you. You have 5 minutes to consider. Please think clearly. For you, whether it's more important to live or to carry out your own ambitions. Life or freedom, which was more important? The debate on this topic had never stopped since the moment humans developed their own independent consciousness. Chapter 501. Idealists believed that freedom was the most precious thing in the world, and nothing could be compared to it. Although life was important, it was not something that could not be sacrificed. Realists, on the other hand, believed that life was the most precious thing in the world. If one did not even have one's life, what was the use of freedom? Of course, all of this was not worth debating in Andre's eyes. First of all, from the moment a person left the mother's body, there was no such thing as freedom. Law, morality, power, and all sorts of other things would constantly press down on them, forcing them to abide by certain rules of conduct. Just as a scholar once said, absolute freedom was equivalent to absolute chaos. Even the abyss, the home of the demons, which was known as the most evil, chaotic, and unethical place in the entire universe, abided by the basic law of the jungle. Therefore, absolute chaos did not exist, and so did absolute freedom. Since freedom was a joke, life was naturally the most precious thing in life. Even though there was a so-called world after death on the Oleo continent, apart from the most devout believers, most normal people would rather continue to struggle at death's door in the material world than go to the divine realm to enjoy the so-called eternal life. Obviously, Maurice was not a devout believer, and it was hard to say if she even had any faith. Living in a dangerous environment for a long time might have made her indifferent to life and death, but it did not mean that she was willing to commit suicide. After a simple weighing of the pros and cons, this scheming woman licked the dry blood on her lips and quickly asked in a hoarse voice, "If I agree to offer my loyalty, what benefits can I get?" It had to be said that her moral integrity and principles were so low that it made one's hair stand on end. She almost did not hesitate to use herself as a bargaining chip in an attempt to obtain more benefits. Benefits? Andre stared at her two erratic eyes, a playful expression appearing on his face. Before answering this question, I must first state a basic principle, and that is equivalent exchange. To put it bluntly, I will give you an equivalent return based on how many missions you can complete. As for what exactly it is, it depends on your personal needs. Money, power, authority, and even items and potions related to magic. I can provide almost everything you can think of. Before he could finish speaking, Maurice immediately interrupted him rudely. Authority. I only want authority. Also, please put away your self-righteous bewitchment. I'm not an idiot who fills my head with so-called ideals or heroic dreams. Ha 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 ha. I didn't expect you to be such an anti-idealist. To be honest, I don't really like the heroes in the bard stories. Compared to those who win by luck, I prefer those villains with real personalities. Just think about it. One was an elite who had obtained success through their own hard work and wisdom, while the other was a muddle-headed fool. In the end, perhaps even they didn't know how they had defeated such a powerful enemy. There was a saying that most mortals were stupid. Therefore, they looked up to those heroes who were praised by the ruling class. Little did they know that the best way to achieve success and change one's fate was to imitate the villains in the stories. First, they had to make a careful plan and then realize it step by step. Looks like it wasn't a coincidence that you were able to stand out among countless people. At the very least, you have a clear goal in life, which is much better than those pirates, thugs, gangsters, and thieves downstairs. However, what I said just now was the truth. There was not a trace of exaggeration. You will understand more about this after you get along with me for a long time. Now that you have mentioned that you want to obtain authority, I will talk to you about authority. Perhaps it was because the topic of heroes was brought up, but Andre's mood suddenly became very high. He was also a firm anti-idealist. He especially hated those idiots who did things without thinking and did not consider the consequences. In the end, they still stubbornly believed that they were doing things for the good of the whole world. In fact, not only did they not play any positive role, but they were also extremely dangerous and unstable factors. Every time society fell into a violent turmoil, it could not be separated from their influence. Some of them even personally participated in the riots. The horror of their destructive power was simply appalling. Although, to a certain extent, these guys also promoted the development and progress of society, they were more destructive. In the end, it was often realists who had to clean up the mess for them. Tell me, what is your plan, or what is your ultimate goal? You should know that I will not join an action that is doomed to failure, even if it is in the face of the threat of death. Maurice's hostile expression finally dissipated. It was unknown whether it was because the two of them had the same idea or because it was deliberately released as a smokescreen. After all, for a woman like her who was good at disguising herself, once she began to hide her thoughts, it was basically impossible for outsiders to guess. Unless they used spells like detection of thoughts, they could only stare helplessly. Andre stared at Maurice with a meaningful gaze for more than a minute before answering. My goal and plan are very simple. That is to completely overturn the pirates' rule over the Sardinia Islands. At the same time, I will destroy the underground guild that controls the economic lifeline of Wayland City and seize the final ruling power. Of course, this is not empty talk. In fact, I have secretly obtained the loyalty of several top-ranked captains. As long as I am willing, I can mobilize 12 ships and more than 2,000 ferocious pirates to launch a coup at any time. How about it? Are you interested in joining? I promise that as long as you show your value, not only will you obtain the authority you have always dreamed of, but you will also be able to taste the sweetness of victory. Are you sure this is not a joke? Maurice's tone was filled with shock and disbelief. Her pupils dilated several times in an instant. A joke? Do you think I would joke about such things? Andre asked with a smile as he played with the magic ring in his hand, trying to deduce the craftsmanship through the engravings on the surface. From the moment he held it in his hand, he immediately realized that this was a composite enchanted ring that combined the spells of suggestion and charm person. Judging from its appearance, it should have been personally made by a great mage more than 700 years ago. The craftsmanship was outstanding, especially the dazzling light emitted from the gem. As long as one stared at it for a long time, one's brain would immediately fall into an unconscious state, unknowingly acting according to the will of the holder. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.